stains covering a Craftsman wrench. When the sun's coming up, you can bet we're clocking in. Cash your paycheck, 2-day break, and do it again. We like cold cake beer, fixing up trucks, old bird dogs, and the woman we love. Maxwell has steaming out of a coffee cup. We say our prayers, send them to the sky. Bus stop backs, barely getting by. Carolina to California, up to Illinois. Yeah, there's guys like us, blue collar boys. I'd like
Madam Mayor. Anything I've got going.
Cake beer, fixing up trucks, old bird dogs, and the woman we love. Maxwell has steaming out of a coffee cup. We say our prayers, sing them to the sky. Bus stop backs, barely getting by. Carolina to California, up to Illinois. Yeah, there's guys like us. Yeah, there's guys like us, blue collar boys. Blue collar boys.
Those opposed? Motion carries that the agenda is set. with the exception of
Madam Mayor, I'm sorry, we can't hear anything you're saying. There's music from your end. We can't hear any of the microphones.
We've been swinging and missing. It ain't broke yet.
Did you say music?
Damn, it needs fixing. Been a while since you kissed.
Yeah, there's some country music playing. Okay.
It's
There we go. We got it now. Sorry about that. There's music coming from your end, so we couldn't hear anything up until, well, just now.
Okay.
So are we under control then?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. We've adopted the agenda with the modification of new business. Number 7 is now the second item on the consent agenda. We've pledged allegiance and have a moment of silence. And next we would then have citizens matters. The manager updates. Hazen Blodgett, would you give your update, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the board. Just a short update. As a reminder, we do have a special meeting tomorrow night at 7 to hear the report from Friesen Nichols about merger and rates associated with utilities. We had a very successful Christmas parade. I would like to thank staff for all their hard work and the police department being vigilant about, some of the things that have happened regarding parade safety. And then the department has been checking substations in the area as a result of what happened in Moore County recently. So very proud of our staff and their hard work, continued hard work.
Thank you. As for my update, I simply want to echo the accolades to the staff and to the community in general for the parade on Sunday. It was one of the larger events that I can remember. It was beautifully done, and it was a real joy to see the community come out, especially some of the new businesses in town that chose to have floats. And it was just a very nice event. And we appreciate the safety and the caution under which the staff made the parade route available to us. So Mayor Pro-Tem Baldwin, do you have updates?
I do not have any updates, any additional updates, but I certainly do appreciate your comments regarding the Christmas parade. It was very nice, and I do commend the staff for being there, the police department. And I'm just amazed it was so many staffers there and so appreciative of them all being there to make sure that the parade was a success. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Bonitz,
I have no updates. Thank you.
Commissioner Farrell,
I have a PBA meeting Wednesday. Other than that, nothing at all right now.
thank you, Commissioner Shipp.
Yeah, obviously, thanks staff as well. I was glad also to be able that we were able to attend the staff lunch a couple of weeks ago or so. That was really nice to do that. We did have an AHAC meeting. We decided on recommendations to the county board for funding. So the culmination of that process. So the county board should be approving those soon. And then my EDC meeting on the 21st that I'll be attending. And then just a note on the YouTube page for the town. It had been kind of hard to find the videos unless I went in manually and did something, but I figured it out. So the videos are on the main page now, easy to find without me doing anything to make that happen. So it should be easier to find these meetings after the meeting. And then one concern or question, I guess, is at the planning board meeting. Oh, she's online. Janie mentioned that there was, I think, a month delay in the land use plan update, and that we would expect to see it in February now. So just want to, I think we were originally looking at December, then it went to January, February. So I understand that happens, but I just want to keep on top of it and make sure we don't keep pushing. So.
Yeah, do you want me to address that really quickly?
So yeah, that's good. Yes, please.
Okay. So, yeah, it was just anticipated. And once we got closer to the holidays and everything, we just realized that it would be needed to push a little bit further. So we are on a contract though, however, and we do have, a certain amount for that contract and a little bit of wiggle room either way. So, that's why we're able to push it, because we just want to put forth at least the best plan that we think can be put forth at this time. So it is a delay, but we don't intend to push it much more or at all, hopefully.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you, Janie.
Thank you, Janie. Commissioner Vose,
I don't have anything to add.
now is the time for public comment. Is there anyone signed up for or here in the auditorium that wishes to make public comment? Hearing none, we'll then move to the consent agenda with the exception of number 2, which has been removed to new business. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Farrell, seconded by
Second.
Kyle Shipp. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion carries unanimously. Under new business, Jennifer Eads will be speaking with us regarding salary schedule adoption. And Jennifer, for those of you who have not yet met Jennifer, she's our new HR director. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. Good evening. Jennifer Eakes, Human Resources Director. I brought to you the salary schedule. This was started prior to my employment, and I have worked with Heather Meacham, our finance director, and also Hazen, Mr. Blodgett. And this is supposed to be adopted by the board. So this essentially sets our minimum, midpoint, and maximum rates for our salary grades. So once it is brought to you guys, like I said, it was started prior to my getting here, but then I was informed that it had not been adopted yet. So, and by statute, the board has to adopt it. And once you do that, then we can this will be our guideline to go by for salaries. So I'm asking that you adopt the proposed salary schedule.
I noticed on the schedule that there were 4 or 5 items that were in the at the very bottom that did not, that they had the classification, but not the title. Was that
We don't have any positions in those grades. This is for the positions that we do currently have. And of course, the town manager is not graded. It's not a graded position. So this was put together, and if we ever have a job that would fall into one of these categories, then that would be the grade range, but we currently do not have any in those grade ranges.
Thank you.
Jennifer, one question.
Yes, sir.
What grade level are these to be? It says 6 employees that need to be based on a grade level. What grade level needs to be improved?
Their grade level. So I think it's for police officer. So their grade level would be a 27. Some of them.
I think you're saying that individual people need to have their salary adjusted to match these grade levels.
Correct, just 6 of them.
Okay.
Yeah, there's only 6 employees that currently fall below the minimum if this is adopted. So we would have to bring them up to at least the minimum.
And I mean, are we allowed to know what grade level it is?
Yes, what do you mean? What grade
I
level?
mean, what grade level is this affecting?
They're different. There's 6 different employees, so they're different grade levels.
Right.
So there's, I think, 3 or 4 police officers, 1 public works, and actually myself. Not by much, just a little bit.
I really wasn't worried about the position. I was just concentrating on the grade level was only, I thought we needed.
So they are, the police officers be 27. My grade level would be a 33. Public Works, the one that is below, I think theirs is, I think a 25, or it may be a 27. I'm not sure. I don't have that information in front of me. I'm sorry.
And I know we had done a salary study. Is this the salary study or results of that salary study?
Yes, this is the results that Chris and Heather had talked about based on that salary study, but it was never adopted.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Questions for Jennifer? Is there a motion?
Move to approve the salary schedule.
Moved by Commissioner Bonitz,
Second.
seconded by Commissioner Farrell. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, motion carries unanimously. And next, we have Jennifer introducing the job description services of Triangle J Council of Governments.
Yes, upon my employment here, it has come to my attention that we do not have job descriptions for every job that we have. And that is crucial to for our employees to know what they're working towards, what they're working for, how to better themselves, how to move up. So, and it just kind of spells out the main duties of the job. We only have a few job descriptions. And so when I talked to Triangle J, they are the ones that did the salary study. And they said that it was not requested at the time that they provide job descriptions. But those are very crucial when people are out, you know, sick or whatever. When they come back to work, we need to know that they can come back in full capacity. But if we don't have a job description just explaining their job duties, then we really don't have anything to go by. And it's kind of hard to hold employees accountable if they don't have a job description.
All right, questions for Jennifer? Is there a motion to adopt?
I'll make a motion to adopt or to approve.
I'll second that.
Moved by Commissioner Shipp, seconded by Commissioner Bonitz. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Next item under new business, Hazen Blodgett to discuss a budget request for us.
Yes, ma'am, Mr. Mayor, Miss Mayor, let me pull that up real quick. So this is a rather straightforward in many ways, but downtown director Teresa Thompson approached me probably about 6 weeks ago about adding some carolers to the holiday season. I thought it made a lot of sense to me. We're really trying to work together as a team with all the different downtown groups. So I approved it. She'd previously reached out to the choirs in the area, and I approved for some carolers out of Raleigh to come 2 times. As we got into it, and we hired them basically. So when we got into it, there's no specific line item in the budget, the downtown budget for this. You all do have a special line item for special event sponsorship, and it's in the governing board budget. And in the absence of having a specific line item, we felt like the prudent thing to do is to bring it back to the board so you all could approve it. And it makes it much more cleaner. More cleaner period. But I think going forward, we need to figure out in the downtown budget items like this. So, it's for the enhancement of the community. But in this case, we're recommend to authorize $1,378 from the special events line item to pay for this group. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions, Mr. Blodgett?
I don't have any issue with this overall or like how it happened, but I think just going forward or probably for budget next year, if we can look at having, some of that money in downtown or something like that, because just so that we don't need to see a budget request for 1,300 for a downtown event like this.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you doing what you did in this case, but let's look at it for next year that they have some a budget for that and can just do nice things downtown.
Yes, sir.
I'll also echo that also too, Kyle. Hopefully maybe we can have this money spent locally too. I mean, we do have local high schools that have chorus groups, middle school has chorus groups, and I'd rather see this money go in town than out.
Mhm.
Maybe we can make that a stipulation in the budget.
And with that stipulation,
For next year.
for next year.
Yeah.
It did say they tried this year to
Yeah,
contact local
exactly,
groups, but
yeah.
Is there approval of $1,378 from the governing board funds?
so moved.
Moved by
Second.
Commissioner Shipp, seconded by Commissioner Bonitz. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries unanimously. Next, we're looking at the NCDOT grant application for paved trails and sidewalk feasibility study. Steve and Morgan will be joining us for that discussion. So would you all like to come up and tell us about this feasibility study?
Hello, everyone. I'm Steve. I'm a planner with the town. Morgan is in the virtual landscape, but I am here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reiterate what I had sent out in the memorandum. And so I'm just going to go ahead and touch upon that again. In 2021, NCDOT was allocated $2 million in one-time funding from the North Carolina General Assembly. And this was to establish a feasibility study program for paved trails. In 2002, the Integrated Mobility Division was also awarded $500,000 in state planning and research to support funds to support sidewalk and shared use path feasibility studies. The purpose for this, the Paved Trails and Sidewalks Feasibility Studies grant program, is to improve the pipeline of bicycle and pedestrian projects accessing state and federal funding, resulting in successful implementation of projects by communities prioritizing multimodal infrastructure. in particular to Pittsburgh, this is addressing connectivity, just providing more walkability, access to parks in general, to the downtown. And I'm not sure if there's going to be any questions, but I'll just say ideally, if this feasibility study were to be granted, following a resolution, signed resolution document, it would be great to have the connection that runs from the community college and then the Thanks Trail area, and then that'll attach to Kiwanis Park. And then on the opposite side, there would be sidewalks or paved trails that could lead individuals to the downtown, and then possibly even accessing the Food Lion and everything in between. What I at least, and Morgan can touch upon this after I'm finished, but there are two options with this feasibility study. Pittsburgh would fall under a small scale feasibility study, and they would cover 100%. There'd be no matching, and that could be go from 60,000 to 80,000. And there's a number of route alternatives, would be up to 4 alternatives that would be evaluated. The mileage range would be anywhere from quarter mile to 3 miles. And so just to continue with the words that were already placed in the memo, the town of Pittsburgh intends to submit an IMD application for the paved trail sidewalks feasibility study grant. The study aligns with the language and intent of the town Pittsburgh bicycle and pedestrian plan. And to complete this application, to apply for it, complete it, submit it, a resolution from y'all is needed. And Morgan, I don't know if you want to dovetail with anything that I just said, but if you do, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I guess I just wanted to add that this is kind of a group effort between town planning and engineering. Steve and the planning department is doing some preliminary planning work to get this feasibility study grant application submitted, in hopes that we do get some good results from it, and then we can work together with the engineering department to move forward with the implementation of the findings that we get from the study in the coming years, just using the different funding opportunities that we have.
Thank you, Morgan. Are there questions for either Morgan or Steve?
Just to clarify, we have the bike and pedestrian plan. So this is a need identified in the bike and pedestrian plan, and it's a further step
Yes.
towards accomplishing that.
Yep. Yeah.
Excellent.
Exactly.
Is there a motion to approve the feasibility application?
So moved.
And
Moved by
second,
Commissioner Shipp, seconded by Commissioner Bonitz. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion carries unanimously. Next, thank you, Steve.
Hey, thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Morgan.
Appreciate it. We'll see you a little later.
Hopefully a little later.
Next, we'll look at the Water Infrastructure Act and Risk and Resilience Assessment. Kent Jackson, if you'll give us the certification letter of promulgation.
Yeah, good evening, Mayor, members of the board. So in 2018, federal infrastructure legislation was passed, and it established a requirement to do risk and resiliency assessment and an emergency response plan. And so the town has worked with HDR, engineering consultant from Raleigh, to complete those requirements and certify these plans to the federal government. So we completed most of that process in 2021 per the legislation, and wrapped up the documentation this year, and wanted to give you a brief overview of that process. So tonight I have Steve Brown with HDR. Steve is a senior associate and project manager, and he'll talk about the process that we undertook to complete the requirement. I think you'll find it was quite impressive how HDR helped us through this. So Steve, if you would come up.
Thank you, Kent. Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. It's good to be here tonight, and we're very excited about having this opportunity to work with the town of Pittsboro on a very important initiative. As Kent said, I'm Steve Brown. I'm with the HDR Consulting Engineering Firm, and so I'll step through the project here. How are we advancing the slides? Do I have a? You just ask. Ask. Okay. Advance the slide. Great. So the America's Water Infrastructure Act was passed in 2018 by Congress, and it was in response to a lot of security threats and risks to water systems, brought about everything from 9/11 to terrorist activity. And there was a very serious water source contamination event in West Virginia in 2014, where a large chemical storage facility actually failed into the river. And the city was without water. City of Charleston was without water for days, even for fire suppression. So it was a very serious threat. And Flint, Michigan, think about all the communities. So Congress passed this law, and it requires communities to take a very serious threat analysis look at their water systems. And it's a national security concern at the highest levels. So it's a requirement for water utilities to do this. So as we get into the presentation, I want to just approach this from the perspective of going through what was required, what does the law require, what did Pittsboro do about it, and then how is Pittsboro better prepared and better off for having gone through this. Next slide, please. So what was required? Next slide, please. Just in the general sense of resilience and preparedness. So resilience is just your ability to take on risk and handle it and manage it and respond to it in an effective way. So this is a continuous cycle that the work we did with the town staff has set the town up to be prepared. You're always preparing for these things by having people and equipment and practices in place so that when an event does happen, you're able to respond quickly. So that's the next step in the cycle here. And then this is the initial response when an event occurs, to stop the bleeding, get back into business, and then recover and get back to normal operations as quickly as possible. And then the final step is mitigation, which is really there all the time. So this is a constant cycle where you're mitigating and coming up with ways to prevent things from happening and keep them from being bad if they do happen. So it's a constant cycle of resilience and preparedness. Next slide, please. So this law requires all communities over 3,300 persons to adopt a risk and resilience assessment, which I'll talk some more about, and an emergency response plan, and to certify that to EPA. This has to be renewed every 5 years. So anything significant in the system that changes or is updated in 5 years would have to be captured in an update of this. And so records maintenance is a very important part of this. And I'll just note before we get started, confidentiality. This is a security concern. Everything in these reports is not subject to public records laws. It's confidential information because it has a lot of detailed information on where your water system is vulnerable. And so the idea is to prepare the town to respond well and to know where those vulnerabilities they are. But in the process of that, there's a lot of sensitive discussions that are confidential. So everything you're going to see in the presentation is not specific to the town of Pittsboro, just for exactly that reason, so that we're not giving away any secrets here or anything. So don't be alarmed if you see anything in here. Next slide, please. So North Carolina also requires a source water protection resiliency plan be prepared as well. And this is a specific North Carolina law, and the federal law leaves room for these state law, and a lot of states have different requirements like this. The federal law leaves room for the state plan to be synced up with it. So we accomplish both of these at the same time. So all of your AWIA work also meets the requirements of the North Carolina source water protection law, which again has the same sort of emergency preparedness, conservation measures in the event of water shortage, that you would be able to conserve water effectively, and then also communicate well, because communication is a very big piece of maintaining confidence and ability to be effective in water in providing water service. Next slide. So what did Pittsboro do to meet the requirements of these laws? So there is a compliance issue here. You had to do these things, but Pittsboro did a great job of really engaging this process. We stepped through a process, and that is the front cover of your report, by looking at all the critical assets, and what they are is the features of your water system that are most important to it to make it function properly. Where if they failed, if they were taken out of service for some reason, would this really affect your ability to provide water? So things like your water treatment plant, elevated water tanks, major pipelines and things. Yes, they're all critical assets in your water system because there's some parts of the system, if they for some reason were taken out of service, you would still be able to function. But we looked at the most critical assets. And then the risk and resilience assessment takes an all hazards approach to this. So looking at anything that could realistically happen to impact your water supply, water system. So hazards and threats come under generally three categories. You've got natural hazards like storm events, winter weather, hurricanes, human caused events, whether accidental or intentional. It's a human business, so accidents happen, and that can be beyond control. But then also human caused or intentional events could be anything from vandalism to terrorism and everything in between. So we looked at those. And then dependencies are things where out of your control, but what are you dependent on to operate your water system? Electrical power, you're dependent on Duke Energy. For chemical deliveries, for things like that, that you're dependent on others. And so we looked at a whole range of these things and how they would affect the components of your water system. So this is a pretty lengthy process, and we worked very closely with your utility and engineering staff to really understand how the system functions and where it would be subject to these threats. Another aspect was cybersecurity as well. And the American Water Works Association has a lot of guidance and assessment tools for determining if you have vulnerabilities to cybersecurity threats. And we again looked at source water, and I'll talk some more about mitigation measures as well, but basically things you can put in place to be better prepared to respond quickly in the event of an emergency. Next slide. So risk is a function of, when we looked at the risk, we considered everything that could reasonably be expected to happen. What is the likelihood? You might get a bad winter storm every few years, might get a hurricane every few years, but then some things might happen you might be subject to all the time. Like you kind of always have to be vigilant for vandalism, or, look at what happened in Moore County with the power station. You kind of always have to be aware of those things. We looked at the consequence of that could occur if, say, something was attacked or had to be taken out of service. And so it takes into account what could reasonably be expected to happen to the components of your system. So that's how we determine risk. Next, please. And put it through a matrix here to determine what are the what were the most extreme risks and what really constituted a low risk. So by example, on that chart, something that on the left side could only very rarely occur and might have a very insignificant effect on your ability to run your water system would have been ranked low. Whereas something that was almost certain to happen maybe every year and would have a very severe consequence would get an extreme rating. And so we ranked dozens of these combinations and determined and isolated and funneled down to the few things that we really needed to spend our time on. Next, please. And in the process of this, applied measures to see how could we reduce that risk. And so here in this case, this is not a Pittsburgh example, but the very first on the left was something that could have a very major consequence and a very extremely high risk because it was very likely to happen by say for this, just in this example, improving physical security at a pump station, reduced the risk down to a very low level. And by looking at ways to do things like this, maybe changing some operational practices or installing some remote computer monitoring. Things like that. It's just a good example of the kind of things that we talked about to reduce risk. Next, please. And so all of this assessment of risk and identifying ways to reduce risk led us to then develop an emergency response plan. Once we really understood the risk profile, the emergency response plan was informed by that. Next. And so an emergency response plan is specific plans to respond to those emergencies if they do occur. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is to get started, to actually recognize that you have an incident happening, that you actually do have an emergency. So it has steps to recognize that And then some of the very first steps, who do you call? What do you need to check on? What records do you need to start keeping? And so to get started, and the whole purpose of the plan is really to protect human life, to keep your systems functioning properly, to stabilize things and get back to normal as quickly as possible. So we have detailed plans. We develop detailed plans with your utility and engineering staff to do just that. Next slide. So resources, equipment, procedures, plans, and people being the most important part of this, because the people are the ones who implement the plan. Next. And so we worked very closely with a lot of staff through this process. A lot of town departments were represented, like I said, utilities, engineering, but also public safety, PIO, functions, administration, finance, because you don't respond to emergencies on your own, so you don't prepare for them by yourself. County emergency management was part of the process as well, and brought a lot of good input to that. And so this also uses a lot of terminology and systems that if you had an event that got beyond the town, say the county and the state was involved, you'd be using the same language, the same procedures. So it indexes very nicely with that. Next, please. And these checklists that we developed, again, they're very action oriented, very specific to the town's water system and to the actions that would have to be taken if one of these emergency scenarios did come to play. Next, please. And I mentioned also the source water resilience and response plan was part of this as well, and has very specific steps built into the emergency response plan in this case as well. Next. And mitigation strategies, finally, some things you can put in place to be able to respond well. Detection strategies, just even getting early detection on, say, contamination events or an intrusion to a sensitive facility is a key way to get ahead of things and maybe intervene before something gets out of reasonable control. Identifying alternative water sources. And I know the town has a lot going on right now with, Jordan Lake and Sanford and others that could be, were identified and discussed as part of this as well. But having a little diversified portfolio there. And also understanding that will be on the future opportunities as well. And next, please. So how's Pittsburgh better prepared, more resilient? Finally, next. And this is just a nonstop cycle of just being prepared. So I think through the process, we really enjoyed working with your utility and engineering staff. And I think it was a good opportunity to really understand a few things and spend some time talking about these preparedness, to do some evaluations, look for ways to improve. A lot of us, and this cycle is another one of these cycles where it's constant assessment, making plans, developing plans, talk about those plans. And so that when you can train on them and exercise them, it's like everything. If you're on a softball team or in the church choir, whatever, you practice, you train, so that when it gets to game time, you can act quickly. And so that's the process we went through. Really, I think the town is much better off for having gone through this process, because it really gave pause for everybody to think through all these potential threats and consequences and build a very good plan to be prepared for that in the future. So you've made a good investment, and I'll just say HDR is very thankful for the town for this opportunity. And I've done these all over the country, and very much enjoyed working with the people here in town. So thank you very much for that. And I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Questions for Steve Brown?
Sure. So we have I think a unique resource with Colby being the PIO and emergency manager. I don't know what time this study took place, but I'm assuming that our role of emergency manager was taken into account in these procedures and things like that.
He joined the team late in our process. So he was part of our final compilation, the final report, and the discussions on that. So yeah, his name's in there several times, but it's I think he did join us late in the process. Yeah.
Okay. And then I think this is Kent or somebody, but like obviously there's recommendations in here for us to improve our infrastructure. So I just want to make sure we get those integrated in budget discussions and capital improvement plans and things like that. Maybe not all the reasons why, understandably, but just that we pick up these recommendations and roll them into funding.
Yeah, and we recommend, due to the sensitive nature of the material, that it not be made public, but certainly we also recommend that if elected officials want to see that it would be appropriate to review that maybe in the office and to understand what's in there.
Okay, I'm not sure I need to see it,
Right.
but just that, we see a budget request for a new pump or something like that, and driven by this, so.
Further questions? Thank you, Steve Brown. We appreciate your information.
Thank you very much.
Kyle Shipp, if you would lead us in discussion on item number 6, please.
Yes.
No. Yes, we do need to
Yes.
make a
Is
motion.
there a motion for that?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Bonitz,
Second.
seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Pamela Baldwin. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. So, Kyle Shipp.
Sure. So I think this is pretty straightforward, and Tim is here. I don't know if he wants to speak, but Chatham Park had just expressed an interest in investing in downtown. So they've committed to make a $125,000 investment in downtown based on the needs that we've seen from community surveys and from the work plan that the Teresa had presented last meeting. So appreciate that. That's great. No strings. They'll reimburse us for projects that we complete downtown up to a value of $125,000.
All right. Is there a motion to that effect? To accept the donation?
I'm curious about the nature of the reimbursement structure concept. So how does that work?
We still need Mr. Misc to get those details down, but the concept was that it was to do projects, to put things in place and not and quickly. So that was the only reason for the reimbursement versus writing a check, essentially, is that that the projects happen quickly, but they don't have any preference on projects. Some of the feedback I heard is that no more plan, that not use this for plans. This is not from Chatham Park, but use it to put projects in place, signage downtown, do things downtown with this money. Plans are certainly important, and we've got a lot of them, and we'll need more, but use this for rapid implementation of some of those things on that downtown work plan.
True. Yes, I absolutely agree with that. We don't need any more studies, I think, about what we can do downtown, because we know it needs a lot of things, but I prefer for it to be if we do accept these funds, to be applied for action.
Great.
So we're awaiting staff or Mr. Misc to create a memo of understanding or similar.
Well, I think we could make a motion to accept and let Mr. Misc figure out the particulars. We probably have a budget amendment later or something, but so I'll do that. Make a motion to accept the donation of $125,000 from Chatham Park for downtown projects and for a budget amendment to come in the future.
Second. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, the motion was made by Commissioner Shipp, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Pamela Baldwin. Is there further discussion? Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We're bringing forward the Parks and Recreation Quarterly Update. So Kate is going to join us at the podium to discuss that. Welcome, Katie.
Hi, friends. How's it going? Okay. Let's see it. Quick. I hope this is gonna come on. It's not. All right. So I just have a couple of things that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention. We try to do a quarterly update for the Parks and Rec Advisory Board. And we had a couple of things that were really, some achievements for us. First being the Kiwanis Park Playground reopening that happened a couple weeks ago. That is a project that the PARB has been working on with the Kiwanis Club members for site updates, specifically the playground that was had been loved to death. So it was time for an update. And so as of a month ago, we had a brand new fire truck playground installed, and we've gotten a lot of great feedback. And that was something that was really high on our priority list for the PARB. And then next, one of the things that we're really focusing on that y'all have heard and will hear often to come is the Rural Transformation Grant that will go towards that's opening March 2023, and we'll go towards, we're applying for the Lewis Freeman Memorial Park. So there were some modifications that PARB has met with and talked a lot about in a lot of detail regarding, some public accessibility, public parking, some of the boardwalks and pathways, slight modifications that we're working with Surface on, and really just talking to make sure everything is covered before the grant. And then the overall thing that we're looking forward to next is kind of goals of 2023 that we would like to implement as a board. These are things that we need updated signage and rules at the parks that need to be approved, incoming plan reviews of Parkland, what that looks like, prioritizing future projects, and really engaging the public with these projects coming down. We want to make sure that we really have that relationship with the public so that we're making sure we're meeting the community's needs. And that is a really big focus. So that can be everything from event presence from the board, like we did at the street fair this past year, to initiatives like the park cleanup day that we would like to do probably in the spring, just to get out and create some awareness within the community of the great parks and opportunities that we have. So there is no action, just information. So, there we go.
Questions for Katie?
I'll just say, I know one citizen who likes to go to the fire truck every day.
Yes.
And he's upset there's no lights and horns though. But
Oh,
I don't think the neighbors are, but he is.
we'll work on that more. Okay.
Katie, what about the rubber that's underneath the swings in the other area of Kiwanis Park? Is that to be replaced?
Yes, so that is one thing that we're hoping to do. There is every year we get we apply and receive grant funding from Chatham County, and the swings are next on our list. And the rubbering was well received within our community that was installed at the fire truck. So we're hoping that we can implement. I've had some playground inspectors out there, and the swing foundation itself is great. We may work on getting some updated swings itself and new rubber surfacing for that with those funds. Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else? Is there
I'm sorry, one more I forgot about. The renovations on the community house, what's the status of that?
So not much status right now, friend. What I'm trying to do is get a list on, I found a architect that focuses or that specializes in the historical realm. And I would like to call him, trying to get on his schedule to come out and kind of see what what we're working with there, and any restrictions that we may have there that I'm not thinking of, but also some different ideas and things like that. So that is to come.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, this was an item which was on the consent agenda that had no approval necessary. It was an information item only. So if we are content with that discussion, then we can move to old business, at which Katie will remain at the podium to discuss the MOU for the Parkland agreement.
Hi, friends again.
Hello.
Okay, so what we are focusing on today and is the MOU that was approved in September and that was signed. And I want to give just a little bit of a history and where we're at right now. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this was what was originally in the PDD master plan for Chatham Park. And this is section 4.1. Next slide, please. And so this is like a zoomed in version. This is what it was originally, how it was originally presented, right? And so it was 45.9 acres. And then next slide. What is now presented to us is 51.4 acres. And the shape has changed a little bit, but one of the things I want to keep in mind before putting up the picture is after reviewing everything, it does meet and as the MOU states, it does meet the four required elements, with the fifth one coming in the future. And I attached that for y'all's review too, of why that one would be coming in the future at a later date. Next slide. This is the new proposed section that was sent out. Like I said, it does meet the element requirements. It has a significant amount of road frontage to it. It also, one of the things that, would possibly limit what would go there would be the stream that's going down in the middle. But again, it does meet the element requirements. And more than anything is that with something that is as significant as the 51.4 acres is we would have, I know we talked about the plans earlier. We would like to have a plan for this overall to really get community and public feedback on what needs and what would potentially go here. And so I can open it up to any questions for y'all or any feedback.
Yeah, this is great. This is very helpful to see. It's very clear that unity and shape and access are self-evident. Usability is not self-evident to me as I look at those topos. So I'd like to hear about, excuse me, what kind of metrics or basis staff use to make that conclusion of usability.
So, okay, can you unpack that a little bit more?
Sure. I think that since this was conceived as a regional athletic facility, with discussion in the documents of fields, significant topography and fields don't really line up in my limited understanding of parks development.
So here's one of the things that keep in mind of what's put in as a design and what's said there doesn't necessarily mean that we're binded to go that route. A lot of these are, as was discussed, whenever the small area plan, everything is, they were conceptuals. This is what could potentially go there. So especially with the athletic, until what for the MOU was basically the boundaries that were provided. So that doesn't mean necessarily, could an athletic facility go here? Maybe. One thing that I would also say is that what our community needs, right? Is that something that they're expressing as a need? We're not necessarily locked in that it's going to be an athletic park. One thing that I would encourage is, and I would like to do would be to ensure that we do public engagement and provide public input on what could potentially go there, and get maybe some alternative designs of, if it's not athletic fields, could we do athletic fields here, athletic complex? Maybe, but that's something further down the road. Right now, this is really just boundaries that are we deciding to accept the land with the boundaries as they are right now. All the other concepts and things would be at a later date. Does that answer your question?
I hear what you're saying, and our Parks Master Plan also indicated that this would be an athletic facility with fields. So, our prior planning has gone in that direction. The community input that I've heard goes in that direction. And that's what the master plan had indicated. And I think that that's right and appropriate, because I think there's a great need for that for this region of the county and of the triangle, frankly. So yeah, that's my concern.
Well placed. I do think with the 45-second property, and just like soccer fields, with a baseball field, there's a rectangle usual shape. When people think about sports complexes, sometimes they think about them for soccer fields and things like that, and just by the very kind of nature of the creek, it limits us to be try to play around things. It limits. I guess we're trying to moderate expectations on what if it was going to be an athletic complex, what it would look like, and weighing that against the best exactly the community wants. And maybe there's a couple of soccer fields and a couple of baseball fields. Does that represent a sports complex? Or is it just so? I think we're just trying to balance all that out. Right. Sometimes problem. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but my concern is that we're getting away from the plan. And
right.
We invested in a significant parks master planning process. This was conceptual and inspired based on the Chatham Park master plan, that it would be fields, soccer, football, baseball. I think even basketball was in there. But the topography doesn't lend itself to that. And so is the land that has been donated going to change our plan, our parks plan? Or are we going to reconsider the donation? I mean, I think that's what this board needs to decide, because we're a policymaking board, and the prior plans were for athletic facilities of a regional nature. And I think that's really important. We're going to be 40,000 to 60,000 people. We need a regional athletic complex. That need was anticipated in the parks master planning process. And I guess I'm beginning to repeat myself, but.
Are there additional questions or comments?
I guess I would say that a regional sports complex could have a lot of different looks. And I would hope that one in Pittsburgh is unique and distinct from other places too. So, I mean, I think it could be a feature of having this and having a more maybe natural sports complex or things like that based on the department. I don't think the plan said, and I haven't reviewed it recently, but said like how many fields. I know there's some thoughts about what you need to run tournaments and things like that, but I think it can be a regional sports complex. And the reality is too, like, the larger, more complex that we think about is a some funding thing that we need to anticipate in the future. So I think there's some opportunity for this site to be some things immediately for Pittsboro, and then, further in the future, other things. But I think, part of the reality now too is that we can't afford to build a regional sports complex that might be comparable to what's in Charlotte or some of those other places. And so when you think about what that looks like and how we afford it, and what we could use immediately, which I think a lot of people would appreciate about a large section of property like this.
Yeah, the concept was that the South Village Regional Sports Complex, the Chatham Park investors would allocate that land and transfer that land so that we could then use that as a cost share, if you will, to do that fundraising to on a long-term basis as a part of our capital improvement plan, create that regional athletic complex. Get grant funds for it, presumably, or a bond. And I don't think we're in any position to do that now. But these were some of the reasons why I was concerned about the action we took previously. Accepting it without knowing the boundaries. So now that we know the boundaries and we know the topography, yeah. I'm not sure that it's in line with the plan that has been documented and codified. So I'm uncomfortable with that.
Is it because it says regional athletic park in the overall plan that's giving?
The master plan calls it a South Village Regional Sports Complex.
And is there any discussion or definition of what that would mean to us when that was being drafted?
Yes, there was description. Page 147 of the master plan said, it indicated that South Village Regional Park will have playground, basketball, tennis, pickleball, baseball, softball, soccer, football, walk trail, and picnic. Page 148, while not located in the North Village, Chatham Park intends to dedicate approximately acres of land located on Moncure Pittsboro Road before development occurs in the South Village. This is proposed to be a regional sports complex for town and county residents, and this early dedication allows the town to pursue grants from local and state agencies for initial development of the park with the value of the land being used to meet match requirements.
I think even those sound like different things, like all of the things you listed off there of pickleball and things like that. Like I've heard some discussion about what's necessary for baseball tournaments and the type of thing, for that. But if we had that in addition to pickleball, basketball, playground, all those other things, like to me, that sounds like a regional sports complex, what you just read, and what we've heard described also about a baseball tournament facility also sounds like a regional sports complex. So I think that's where it's tough to talk about illustrative things as a part of this plan, especially before we have any land, because we also can't really design a facility and then go find the land for that specific facility. So I think we have a great opportunity here. And I think with what we know about the other development around this location, then it's also a good location. But I think this gives us the opportunity then to do exactly that, is use it to decide what we do want, what that regional sports complex means to Pittsboro now that we know more about it, more about our community, things that are happening, and use the value of the lands to apply for grants exactly as that indicated. And I think the things that you read off there out of the plan could be accomplished here, but probably not in addition to other, tournament level soccer fields and baseball fields and things like that. That's a big direction we would need to decide on of, what does regional sports complex mean?
Mhm.
I have a question for someone. It's 51 acres. Is that not enough to build a sports complex?
So it really.
In theory.
Yeah, in theory, yes. What I'm saying, or what I can foresee is, depending on what the definition of your sports complex is, that a 4-field athletic complex or baseball, softball complex, or is that, as Commissioner Shipp was saying, it really just depends on what you want to go there and how you're defining the athletic complex. Is there room? Yes. And like I said before, it does meet the usability and all the elements are met that were required to meet for this particular property.
So the things that were named, that is large enough of an area to have the pickleball, the other things you named. Is that
depending on how many courts you want, or depending on how many fields you want, depending on how many, some of them, yes. I mean, but it's, like in many, I mean, we're working with an ample amount of land. Yes, it just depends on how many courts and how many fields and how many things. Like, it's just kind of like a puzzle piece of what you want in there, what you're wanting to define as an athletic complex.
But some of those things which were named can certainly be placed there.
Correct.
Okay. I know one sports complex that I've been to, I know they have soccer ball, they have soccer fields, they have football, they have also, they have 2 to 3 football fields. They have soccer fields, and all of that is and then they have an area in which you could go, just in for the children and for the bathrooms and different things like that. So certainly I would think this would be large enough to accommodate some of those things. I mean, if it was saying if you need 2 or 3 football fields, maybe not. But we should know that it is enough acreage to accommodate some of this.
Correct. Yes.
My concern isn't the acreage. It's the topography.
So what about the topography? Is it not well enough? I mean, what's going on with that?
Right. I mean, everything would have to be graded depending on, it all depends on what we want to put in there, but there's not everything that's outside of those stream beds and everything is, we can make work to make it into a complex of what we define it to be.
Okay.
And I can add a little bit to that. I'm sorry to interject as Molly Boyle, a planning project manager. And to Katie's point there, it's not uncommon to have to grade or fill a site in order to make it more amenable for your development. And I just also want to add that this is something that we encounter pretty often in planning, especially when you're dealing with a very large master plan like this. You conceptually identify a site as being ideal for something. And then when you actually get into site development, you may find that the site either needs extensive improvements, perhaps in this case, maybe it would be grade or fill or something like that in order to make it more even for fields. And sometimes you might find that, the site is not ideal after all for what you want it to be. That doesn't necessarily mean that we don't get a regional facility. Maybe this just means that this isn't the location. And I'm not saying that, I'm saying that's a possibility, but that means maybe we'd have to look somewhere else in South Village for that. And remember, Chatham Park has to dedicate a certain amount of parkland. I believe it comes out to 1,320 acres of parkland. So I think we still have options here. We don't know yet. I mean, I understand Commissioner Bonit's concerns. A lot of the topography doesn't look ideal for what we originally identified this site to be. when we get more into development, we look at, can we make this site do what we want it to do? And if we can't, then we look somewhere else in South Village for, a regional facility.
I think too, this map is 1 foot contour lines. So we don't typically see that level of detail, I don't think, on the map, and that can make it look more extreme than it is in some areas. Obviously, the stream does have that thing, but I think also in Pittsburgh, we have a sort of history, at least, I don't know about an expectation, but of having unique parks that are tucked in areas. So I can imagine a playground being in a more unique area here, and then we do clear and grade some areas for sports fields, and I don't think it's a violation necessarily of the original plan. If we don't end up with a basketball court on this site, even though it was mentioned, I don't think that that's a failure. If we decide that pickleball is a lot more popular now and we want to put 6 pickleball courts here, I think it's intended to shift over time.
Agreed. However, I've got many emails from people who are interested in seeing soccer fields specifically. And I think, we already know that the basketball courts are well loved and well used, as well as the tennis courts. So, yeah, I just don't want us to lose that concept that this was to be a regional sports complex, and I hope we can make it so. And I'm concerned about the conclusion that it's usable, despite the obvious topography and do we even have any geology work done on the site yet to know whether or not it's indeed gradable?
No. This is strictly just boundaries and approving.
Understood. Yeah. Yeah. But it was boundaries for a regional athletic complex. So that's, I guess, where we are. A whole lot of work got done on something that is now changing use. That's what I'm hearing, that we're no longer talking about a program of a regional athletic complex, generally speaking.
No, that's what we're saying is that like it will really depend on what we're able to do once we get into it.
Yeah.
Of what this looks like. I mean, is it baseball, softball fields? Yeah. Is it multi-purpose fields? Is it pickleball courts? It really is going to change depending on what we decide, but we get to define that.
Can I make one statement? Maybe out of line and maybe off target, but this memorandum is to accept the land. And in 5 or 10 or 20 years, when we build something there, that may not even be what we need at that point. We may not need a sports complex. This agreement is just for to accept the 51 acres as it is marked on the parkland. And I don't think Chatham Park's gonna fuss at us, or maybe we have to go to Mr. Misc on this if we have to renew it for not being what'd you just call it? I'm sorry. A regional sports complex. We may need to be something else. But, to me, it looks like the discussion is the 51 acres park complex, the land.
I appreciate that, Jay, and it is fundamentally about the land. But the reason that we're sitting here today talking about this, reason it's on the agenda, is because the master plan said that this was what we're going to do. And the master plan said that this land would have been dedicated in 2021. So we're a little bit behind schedule on that. And our parks master plan says geographically, Pittsburgh is a logical location for regional facilities like sports complexes. Often these regional facilities are partnership projects with more entities than just a municipality, perhaps county parks department, private entities, thank you, and even school systems. That makes sense since these facilities would serve a broader market than just residents within Pittsboro. So it is in our Pittsboro Parks Master Plan as a regional athletic sports complex. It is in the master plan as a sports complex. And now that we see it in detail, topography does not seem to suggest immediately that it would be an easy sports complex. So I'm challenging and asking about usability. Because I don't think we're in a position to just take anything that's given to us, because that may make it significantly more expensive for us to do what has been planned for that area. And you're right, in the future, we may revisit that plan. But right now, all of our documents and planning and hours and tens of thousands of dollars have suggested that we need to have a regional athletic complex in that location.
But could I just add that today we're talking about whether or not we accept the land?
Thank you.
Your comment is a very good one, but I almost think it's to be directed at a future board. I almost think it should be a comment to whoever's sitting here in 20 years, that this is what was wanted, this is what was desired when it was originally spoken about. Like, I think that's a concern for a future day, is what I would add to that. And I think there's some comments. Well, I think there's some people in the audience that may want to speak up.
Before we get to that, I mean, I appreciate, like, I don't have any question that this is going to be a regional sports complex. I think the question is, what does a regional sports complex on this piece of property look like? So doing like quick Google, like a regional sports complex in Alaska is a indoor pool and ice skating rink. And one in Arizona is 16 baseball fields. And, you know, so I mean, that term, I don't think any of us can define it here. But this will be a regional sports complex. And if we wanted to have, you know, a field of every flavor or a court of every flavor for the community to use those things, that's different than if we want it to be a premier soccer tournament location, you know, but we haven't defined that or how we would fund any of those things. So I think we've got to have a location to start with and see what we want and what that regional sports complex is. And, you know, I think Molly made a good point that this is one site of multiple sites. And if we look at this site and we identify this, and then we develop that vision and say, we want to have a 16 baseball field tournament complex, then as we talk about additional park donations, then we say, this is our priority for this. It's got to be, and I don't think there's any topography around here that will support that without grading or anything either, you know? So I think, but as we look at what these is, there's no question in my mind that this will be a regional sports facility that will be unique to Pittsboro and serve our residents.
Chuck Smith, did you wish to make comment? Certainly.
First, I'd refer you back to the, I'm sorry, Chuck Smith with Chatham Park. I'd refer you back to the original package of information that we gave you that included a layout of a regional type sports complex. It included two high school college size soccer fields. Then when you have other tournaments, it's going to be partitioned off for younger age groups and many more soccer fields than that. It had four baseball fields shown as well, in addition to that. It also had the other playgrounds, those other things that are smaller in nature. But this is roughly 5 times the size of Night Farm, just to try to give you a visual of the kind of size we're talking about. When you're talking about topography, where this is Chatham County and it's Chatham Park, you can go through our property and this is the topography we have. I mean, we're facing it with everything we do. Would we prefer something flatter in Chatham Park? We'd love it. This is Chatham County. That's why Chapel Hill has rocks along all their streets. I mean, that's the nature of the character of the land, and we can't change that. But the size and the shape, if you go back to the original slide that you saw and the shape of that was adopted in the master plan, that was not a usable shape. That's why we went back. and reconfigured and showed you the property lines that you were asking for in this form right here. So we think and feel pretty strongly from our professional opinion that it absolutely can be a regional sports facility. That's what we want it to be as well. And Ms. Keller, Mr. Shipp are both exactly right. That the definition, you're going to decide what that definition of what you mean by a regional sports complex. It could be all baseball, it could be all soccer, it could be all lacrosse. Good grief, in our area, cricket has now become the new big thing to try to have because of the diverse populations that are moving in. As Mr. Farrell said, 10 years from now, who knows what this is going to be. But at the same time, the land size and character absolutely meets that description. It also meets the specifications laid out in the element that deals with the amount of topography that can be over 20%. It requires that 65% of a site dedicated to you falls into those standards that are less than those more difficult slopes to build on. This is closer to 80% when you throw in the riparian buffers and the topography that's over 20%. So it far exceeds the requirements in the element. So at that point, I don't know. And we had originally given you that information, but that's been a while ago. So I don't expect it to necessarily be at the forefront of your minds right now, but
It was some time ago. But thank you, Chuck.
thank you.
Is there further discussion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Shipp, second by Commissioner Farrell. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Katie. Morgan DeWitt will lead us now on sidewalk connection, Chatham Business Drive. Morgan, glad you're still with us.
Good evening. This is Morgan DeWitt, project engineer for the town of Pittsburgh. I'm bringing to you tonight a project that we're requesting a resolution to award. This project has come to y'all a few times now, and it's for the sidewalk construction of Chatham Business Drive to connect two different segments to make a full connection for pedestrians. This project was funded with CMAQ funding from fiscal year 22, which is a federal grant program that's implemented through NCDOT. And the design has been completed, and we actually bid the project out twice. And now we're asking for you to approve a resolution to award the contract. Once we have the resolution approved, we will then submit it to DOT for concurrence. And we plan to get started just as soon as we can. Does anybody? Sorry.
Other questions from Morgan regarding this project?
Just a comment, really, and Morgan, I appreciate you kind of walking me through this process a little bit, but kind of a public education moment too, though. Like this contract is for about $330 some per linear foot of sidewalk here, and so as we try and do these projects around town to fill in on sidewalk, and how can we get more sidewalk? We know it's a big problem in a priority, but so. Oh, thank you, Morgan. So this distance right here for sidewalk is $155,000 or something like that, based on the federal requirements. We do have the town of Pittsburgh is only responsible for 20% of that because of the federal cost share. So that's good news, but it's just really expensive to put in sidewalk is the reality. So we try and do, one project a year with the CMAQ funding. And in this case, it's 620 feet of sidewalk exhaust that funding. And we had to bid it twice to even get to there. So it's harder than it seems like it should be.
Yeah, I completely agree. Sidewalks are expensive. Materials for pretty much any kind of construction are expensive right now. But I think one aspect to consider is because you do have the federal funding. So whenever you you're trying to implement a project with federal funds, there's so many different steps that are involved and so many additional requirements in the design phase, and even before you get to the design phase, just with analyzing the piece of land that you're working with, and then it has to be designed a certain way. Certain materials are only allowed, and then once you're ready to construct, there's certain inspection requirements. All the materials, you have to save a ticket for every material that comes on the site. Make sure it's sampled and storage of it is properly handled, and the record keeping is just really intense compared to a project that we would be implementing in-house. So that definitely adds to the cost, but it is expensive. You're right about that. And this one was actually a pretty easy one because we didn't have to acquire any right-of-way. We had to relocate we will have to relocate some utilities, but nothing major with this one. So I think this would be a good standard if you want to just take a cost analysis of how much it really does cost. And Kyle, I know you had asked about cost per square foot or linear foot. This is just an estimate. So when you look at this project specifically and any other CMAQ funded project, DOT automatically takes 10% off the top. So this project was $210,000. So they automatically reserve 10% for them for just admin costs, because every step of the process, before we can approve anything, it has to go through them for review to make sure that we're in compliance with the federal agencies. So it takes a lot of their time as well. So right there's 10% off the top. Usually all that 10% is not used. So, we don't obviously have to pay for it if it's not used, but they do take it out just in the event that they need it. And then inspection costs usually average about 15% of the total construction cost, which is another large, sum of money that is involved in the project. So these are kind of just the four basic pieces that make up these projects and the funding. So if you look at it from a linear foot basis, just to help you get a better understanding. So the first line in this is what was budgeted as like a preliminary engineer's estimate that DOT put together for the project. And so it's about $412 per linear foot, which is very expensive. But thankfully, because we got the grant, we only have to, we get reimbursed for 80%. So that would cost the town, the estimated budget cost would be $127 per linear foot. So it's a little bit less than what was the project or the contract that we're proposing to award was slightly less than that. It would still cost the town, almost $112 per linear foot for the project. So, and that's just kind of an overview of the different costs involved in it. And so we did receive 2 bids on this, the second time we bid. The first time we weren't allowed to open because we didn't have the minimum of 3. So per federal requirements, we were required to rebid. And you can award the second time with less than 3 bids. And the low bid was significantly lower, but it was an incomplete package and they didn't have all the federal requirements. So DOT withdrew that bid. So we're requesting to award to McQueen Construction, and they're still less than the budgeted construction cost.
Thank you. I appreciate you walking us through that, because it is, and that's why we ask for, new development to put in sidewalks, even if it is not connected at the time and things like that, because it's significant to do at a later date. So thank you.
Yeah, that's definitely something we've been doing with the plan reviews that we do have and site plans that come in, is we do require them to make that connection there as development grows, like you said, so it won't fall on the town to do that at a later date.
Are there additional questions, or are we ready for a motion?
Make a motion to approve.
Moved by Commissioner Shipp.
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Vose. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Morgan. Our next item under old business is the Chatham Parkway bonus allocation agreement, and Paul Misc.
You have a couple of documents in response to the last meeting. What we have is the amendment to the 2020 budget allocation agreement, the revised version of the resolution covered both of those documents. The memorandum that was sent out with the documents is really self-explanatory. There are questions on attention. Mr. Vernon, I believe, is here this evening on behalf of the Chatham Park. These documents and the changes that have been made.
Questions by the board? And Mr. Vernon, did you wish to speak to the board?
Good evening, Mayor, members of the Board of Commissioners, staff. This is David Mason from Landover. He and I have worked together on this project, and I think he'll have some very valuable contributions as well. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, but to begin with, I'd like to talk about the things that are settled in this proposal. One thing is settled is that we amended the 2022 bonus allocation agreement to include the comments that the board asked for us to include at the last meeting. In that regard, it hasn't been changed. The resolution itself, however, has undergone some significant changes, primarily to add an option to the process in the event that DOT is able to come up with an alternative method of accelerating the construction of Highway R 5930. We would like to be in a position to accept that alternative if it comes to pass. So R 5930 is the 4,800 foot stretch of highway that we would like to accelerate construction. That is also a constant. The goal here is to have CPI pay the local contribution in order to accelerate Highway 5930. If a bonus allocation system, a statutory bonus allocation system is used, that will occur. The town will serve as a conduit for the passage of right-of-way and cash through to DOT. And the town will not have any operating expenses that won't be reimbursed from CPI. If an alternative comes to pass, the same result will occur. CPI will still pay the local contribution. The town will serve as a conduit for right-of-way and cash, and there will be no out-of-pocket costs that won't be reimbursed. So that's simplifying it as much as I can on this. Do you have any other comments, David?
No, that addresses that component of, or that part of the resolution.
The other document that you have in your package is the amendment to the 2020 bonus allocation. That's one that's already in place, approximately $1.9 million. And that one has been amended to conform the definition of additional road with the definition of additional road in the 2022 bonus allocation agreement, and also to add the provision that the town will be reimbursed for its out-of-pocket expenses. So this would be a way of treating the 2020 bonus allocation and the 2022 bonus allocation on equal footing.
I appreciate you making those edits that we had asked for. One question that did come up about the additional roads was it talks about, it says to be located on property that is owned, controlled, or acquired by developer or property otherwise approved by the town. So I just want to make sure there's no way that the town would be involved to compel somebody to give up right of way or property for this process. As are a part of assisting in this process, that wouldn't be.
No, that's certainly not the intent at all on this. There's no intention to have the town in that process. The only thing that we did was to expand the possibility that there may be property that the town would like road construction to be on, and that was added as an option. But that's not the intention at this point, to create any kind of condemnation or eminent domain environment.
And anything that's not on or owned or controlled by Chatham Park would still have to come back to us for approval to fit in this.
That's correct.
agreement. Okay.
The questions from Mr. Vernon or Mr. Mason?
Make a motion to approve.
I do want to continue. Pause if we could.
Okay.
Before we make motions. So there was significant complexity added to the documents as compared to what we had anticipated seeing. And this is a familiar experience where we feel like we have a conversation, we feel like we come into an agreement, document comes back, referring to our process with the additional elements. And there would be substantial changes that dramatically shifted the intended purpose of the document. And what I'm understanding is that with this, Mr. Vernon, as you described it, an additional option to accelerate the project, that with both these changed resolutions, we would be approving that process at this moment in time and not having it come back to the board. And I just wonder if everyone knows that. If everyone is aware of that.
Come back to the board for selection of the options, or come back to the board as it reflects in future bonus allocation issues.
If Chatham Park Investors opts not to use the bonus allocation process, but instead uses this alternative acceleration process, it would not come back to us. But the law does have that the town or the local government would approve that acceleration process, as we have already done with Chatham Parkway South. That's a substantial change. It also seems, I'll just say strange, that this dramatically different process is introduced in a document where we're talking about bonus allocations and would, I think, as I understand it, obviate the need for the $9 million contribution from the Chatham Park investors in the first place, which in that alternative acceleration process. And so reflecting back to our miserable experience with our neighbors on Country Brown Road, at that time, the project was threatened with interruption or disruption or delay by the Chatham Park investors, saying that they would not contribute that $9 million if the board insisted upon the route that didn't disrupt the neighborhood. And so now the Chatham Park investors are saying that they're thinking about getting rid of that $9 million contribution, just doing it all themselves. That's my understanding of what we have before us tonight. And that's kind of a slap in the face. Because we stepped back from stronger action, I believe, in the Northwood neighborhood issue. Because of that threat of withdrawing the $9 million.
John, I disagree on that, but I believe DOT had quite a bit in that north section as we went and had a second review, and it was still the best and the best position that DOT was going to run that road.
And it was also about the $9 million, wasn't it?
I
don't know about.
I think where the $9 million came in was the DOT told us that unless we brought the $9 million, they were going to put the road where they wanted to put it. They
Yes.
being the DOT, not Chatham Park. That's my recollection.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then for DOT further said basically that it was really out of our control. That they're gonna put it, where they want to put it, basically, just to make a long story short. So it wasn't that.
And I think that in any case, this is talking about a contribution of money for acceleration, whether it's a program, the bonus allocation program that has been done on the section already built, or the acceleration program that we approved on Chatham Parkway South. So I think, either way, there's a contribution from the developer to the state for the road that the state is developing or state is building, and then money coming back from that. So in one case, it's a 100% reimbursement. In one case, it's a 50% reimbursement. If those are the two programs that we're talking about that we've already approved on other sections of road. So I don't see that as a substantial change.
One other point to make too is that the acceleration of 5930A is only on right of way that is owned and controlled by Chatham Park investors today. It has no bearing on the section of Chatham Parkway that is not on our property.
I'm sorry, I'm a little confused there. Does that mean that the parkway will not be built on the Northwoods property?
No, ma'am, this is about accelerating the portion that is on Chatham Parkway's right of way and property that is owned and controlled by Chatham Parkway. This is about acceleration. This has nothing to do with the routing that DOT chose for Chatham Parkway. It's only accelerating the portion under which the right of way is owned and controlled by Chatham Park investors or an affiliate.
I don't have any more questions.
I'll restate my motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Shipp, seconded by Commissioner Farrell. Is there any further discussion?
I do have just one question, and that's about the alternative. I'm going back to that alternative acceleration. Why did you decide to put it in at this time and not in the last time? Can you answer that, please?
Yes, ma'am. we were unaware that the alternative existed until we started pursuing some of the questions that we brought up at this meeting on November 28th. So we have just recently been made aware that those alternatives may be possible.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
To capsulize what that means is that it gives you all a greater flexibility, it gives you more alternatives about the reimbursement and the reapplication for additional roadways. Is that correct?
I don't think so. I'm not sure, Mayor, I'm not sure I understand exactly your question.
I'm not quite certain that I understand the alternative language.
Yeah, and I think that was in response to, when we went back to DOT as you had asked us to do after the meeting 2 weeks ago. And in the process of that research, came to understand that there may be other alternatives to accelerate 5930 besides the bonus allocation program. We don't know what those are right now, but the potential for that does seem to be a possibility. And so we added the language into the document that keeps the town's role completely consistent and the same. We didn't change that at all. It's simply an alternative that may be available, or alternatives that may be available through further evaluation with DOT, that in order to accelerate this, there's a very short window between now and early next year that decisions would have to be made to be able to do that acceleration. Otherwise, the project will just be built on the schedule that is currently on the STIP plan today. And so we chose to add that language in so that if we were asked to move quickly, that we would not have to go back through additional board meetings and reviews in order to do that, predicated on the fact that the town's responsibility remained exactly the same as the bonus allocation program. And that was to receive right away, receive cash contribution from the developer and be reimbursed to the extent the town had any expenses associated with that. So the town's responsibility and role remains exactly the same, potentially, if an alternative is identified and selected.
And I'm sorry.
So so is it true then that Commissioner Bonitz's statement that you did not need to come back to us for any further acquiescence is a true statement based on this additional alternative language?
I think that is a true statement in the sense that we're not asking you to do anything any differently on the bonus allocation or any other alternative that may be made available to us that would from DOT that would allow for the acceleration. So the town's responsibility would remain unchanged in that situation.
It's equally true that CPI's obligations to fund the local contribution and to accelerate construction of that part of Chatham Parkway is unchanged.
Is unchanged?
That's right.
And I'll just say too, like the transportation program process with TARPO and the bonus allocation program, these other acceleration programs are confusing, I would say, and not totally understood by myself. But we do have representatives from DOT and TARPO coming to our January 9th meeting to talk to us more generally about these programs and how we can utilize them as a town, because I think it can be a significant benefit to the town where we can utilize developer contributions to accelerate transportation projects that we need in Pittsboro. And I think we all know a lot of those examples of projects that we need, or, potentially in the future when the town is in a position where we have more money to contribute, we could also participate in these programs. So I'm looking, I'm interested to learn more about how we can contribute in the future as a town when we have more money. And then also how we can, essentially promote this program to other developers also.
I'm interested as well, Commissioner Shipp. I'm very much looking forward to that briefing in January, but I think that that's going to be too late. I still believe that this is our last opportunity for the town to receive bonus allocation funds that could be applied to projects that are outside of the PDD. I still am deeply concerned that I've been raising this issue repeatedly with our prior manager. It's only been in the past week that we got the greatest level of detail that I was seeking. Very concerned that basically we have a town whose financial prospects, because of the dominance of residential development, because of the lower likelihood of significant revenues from industry or commerce, I don't believe that we're going to have the kind of revenues we need to take care of the highway projects outside of the PDD. And I remain in opposition to this agreement as it's designed. My opposition is increasing because it introduces this new element of an acceleration. And I just think it's like a bait and switch. I am curious, Mr. Mason or Mr. Vernon, if you would entertain the question, if you were trying to go down this other acceleration pathway, this to expedite the project, and there is no bonus allocation, if you don't do that, just what would you imagine would be the process for getting your additional roads constructed?
That's something of an unknown at this point. We're still working with DOT to try and establish that.
We have a motion on the floor. I don't want to cut anything short, but do you have additional comments, Commissioner Bonitz, or questions?
No, I don't.
And that motion is to, would you restate the motion?
Generally approved, but let me look back at the memo.
You just need to approve the resolution.
Yeah. Motion to approve the resolution.
And the agreement.
The resolution authorizes the approval of both agreements.
Okay. Seconded by Commissioner Farrell. Anything further? Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed.
Opposed.
Motion carries 4-1. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mason and
Thank
Mr.
you.
Vernon.
Thank you very much.
Next, under miscellaneous, we have Force Main update presentation by Wooten, and Kent Jackson will be working with us on that.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So, of course, development of additional sewer capacity is extremely important. Last month, we took bids on 2 contracts that comprises the system expansion to send 2 million gallons per day of sewer to Sanford's treatment works. We are continuing to work toward the award of those contracts. And so tonight, Charlie Davis is with us from the Wooten Company, and Charlie is the Director of Marketing and Business Development for the Wooten Company. And he has been our principal manager for this project for the town over quite a period of time. So he will give us additional updates tonight and then answer some questions that I forwarded to him today that came from Commissioner Shipp. So Charlie.
Thank you, Kent. Mayor Perry, members of the board, it is a pleasure to be with you tonight. Thank you for the opportunity. I do, can you advance the slide, please, Morgan? I do want to start our conversation tonight with a look back on some key elements. When I came before you in June, was not really permitted or asked to be able to give some history, but I think in the context of where we've come and where we are tonight, or where we've been, it's important for the issue or for the understanding of context and the big picture to kind of put some of these elements in place. So one of the things I wanted to mention, and this goes back to the very inception of the project, there's no doubt that this project has been a key high priority project for the town of Pittsboro for many years. As that is identified, we started off with some special things that we determined working with our funding agency to try to make sure that this was as enhanced or as accelerated as possible. And part of that was where we were doing the engineering report as well as the design concurrently at the same time. That is not customary. Typically, DWI, Division of Water Infrastructure, requires those to follow in order. But again, uncommon approach, but we were looking to get the schedule moving and keep it moving. The next item I had up there is related to monthly meetings. Again, this is an uncommon thing that DWI would allow in terms of routinely or customarily, but we started meeting with DWI monthly. And that not only was our project team, but it was also the manager and town engineer at the time attending each and every meeting. Again, we were looking to move this project, to keep it high profile, to keep it high priority. And everything was on track until the first impactful event occurred back in 2018. And just a little bit about that. And again, I think it just gives you context. Environmental concerns were brought up regarding development reviews. And I think they stemmed from the requirements of the 2010 environmental impact statement that the town had prepared and got approved. One of the things I want to make clear is this project that we're talking about tonight, the pump station and over 14 miles of force main, had no environmental impacts or problems or concerns with the work that we had prepared. However, what DWR, Division of Water Infrastructure, brought up was made now an impact to our project and to our schedule. The Division of Water Infrastructure, who is our primary funding agency, would not allow us to move forward until this Division of Water Resources legal agreement was in place. I'm sure many of you probably remember, but that was a 1-year process just to get a legal document in place. And I know Mr. Misc is fully aware of, but it was a 3-party agreement between the town, between Chatham Park, and between the state, which is very different and very unique. You don't see those very often, but that became, a hurdle that we had to overcome. Once that was crossed, the Division of Water Infrastructure required us to develop secondary and cumulative impacts for all developments within the town. That was town developments as well as Chatham Park. And again, I just want to reiterate briefly, our project had already been cleared environmentally. Again, moving 14 miles of wastewater to the south, but yet we were impacted by those requirements with DWR and related to development permitting, things that this project really had no direct relation. But the reasoning is because since flow was going to be generated through the development of Chatham Park and ultimately would come into this project and ultimately be transmitted to Sanford, that tied us to this process and what held us up. And so I think that's important. And what was that impact? 2 years. That was 2 years on the schedule before we could conceivably get to a movement with DWI to move the project forward. So that was significantly impacted. And I think that's important to note. The next item I got up there relates to the force main reroute. And this takes us back to fall of 2021. And I think I actually reported this to you back in June when I was last before you. But at the time we were bidding this project, which connected directly to Sanford's wastewater treatment plant directly or proper, development down in Lee County that had since development had changed and things had progressed, the alignment of our force main had to be rerouted. And that came up right at the time we were bidding this project. The town elected to go ahead and bid the project, but at that time when we were seeing that prices were concerned, and the town didn't move forward completely with the full bidding process, the determination was made that we were going to reroute over to what is known as the Little Buffalo Lift Station. So that impact took a year out of this process. And I can tell you that the engineering report, the FONSI, which is a finding of no significant impact, design, permitting, essentially all the elements of this project had to be revisited in some form, shape, or fashion to ultimately get through the permitting process, to get us back to where we could have authority to award or authority to bid again. And again, that impact was 1 year. So just think it's important to realize that that's been impactful on this project. Lastly, I just want to point out, when I met with you in June, I gave you a timeline of schedule and milestones of how we were moving this project forward from that point to now. And we met all those timelines and schedules. So I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about funding pursuit. Funding about this project has been discussed with the former manager, Mr. Kennedy, many times. He was very integrally involved in the project, and we had a lot of discussions about funding pursuit. And as we were getting past or finally getting where we could re-advertise and get this project going, and I believe this happened at the June meeting that I was at, the town approved or at least the ability to pursue $5 million in additional SRF loan funding to request that. And so we assisted with that application. We provided some supplemental information to the Division of Water Infrastructure. It did have to go before the local government commission, and you were successful in securing that money. That $5 million was sort of a cap that the State Water Infrastructure Authority would allow an increase in project without going back before them or going for any type of additional funding request moving forward. So we had maximized the ability to seek funding at that time. The other thing that happened in July that was very impactful for the town, and I know you recall the designation of the VUR distress status. And when that occurred and when the town accepted that, that puts you in a situation where you could actually, you're eligible for grant funds, this ARPA money that you may have heard of, that's being managed through the Division of Water Infrastructure. It puts you in prime position to maximize that eligibility, which at that time up to $15 million. Now, the caveat was that the town was awarded a previous project in the spring that already took 4.5 million off of that. It was a find and fix wastewater improvements project. So we had 10.5 million that was available through this ARPA money as a result of now being eligible because you were a VUR distressed community. So we worked with the town. We got buy-in from staff, and we prepared an application in September to pursue the full amount of that money that could be applied toward this project. So an additional 10.5 million, but that was in the form of grant. And so that process is still ongoing. It is not expected that SWIA will make awards until the beginning of the year, but we put together a very competitive application. And we feel like that it really puts you in good position to secure that money. However, I do want to make a point and caveat that at the same time we applied for 10.5 million, the town applied in the fall round of over 53 million in projects to Division of Water Infrastructure. So we're competing against ourselves with multiple projects. But we believe that we put together a very competitive application with the town's help to move us in a direction that would hopefully secure grant money, which otherwise had not been available to us. And honestly, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, but that grant money is about to be fully expended through DWI. At least that's what we've heard. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, so when we prepared that application for submittal, and this was applied or submitted in September of this year, it was due end of September. We did update the cost estimate that was prepared, and it was prepared in concert with the application, trying to maximize priority points and trying to put the town in the best position to secure that additional funding. Those estimates were put together based on best available information and on bid tabulations on similar projects to the extent that we had those available. One of the things that's interesting, and I think you know this, but your project is very unique. There are not really any similar 14-mile large diameter force main projects constructed primarily in rock in the area that we are in the central part of the state. That is a direct comparison to look at bid tabulations and see where pricing is, where it's headed, how it's impactful. So while we use and are customary in using bid numbers to help prepare cost opinions, sometimes the best available information is it only takes you so far. So I just want to point that out, that that we were limited in some comparative projects. And the other thing that I mentioned, we bid 2 of the 3 projects in the fall of 21. And when we bid the force main project previously, we only got 2 bids. And it was at that time that the town manager decided that it was in the best interest of the town to reject all bids, make the change in terms of the reroute for the force main, try to alleviate, let the market kind of settle down and come back with hopefully a better approach at bidding, as trying to see. And the other thing is, if you remember when I reported in June, the time we were bidding this project is when the PVC market hit its all-time high, tripled in price, and it still is sitting there today. The expectation was that it would have some trim back over time. Haven't seen that. So we didn't get the benefit of having unit price bids for the force main contract because the town elected not to go. We would have to re-advertise because we only had 2 bids. That was mentioned earlier about another project where you only had 2 bids and you had to formally go back and re-advertise. We could have opened with 1 bid, but it was made the determination at that time not to do it. But looking back, that would have been very helpful information to try to help us move this project forward from a funding standpoint. And so the total requested amount that we put in for this funding application in September, and there is a typo on my sheet here or my presentation, 37.1 million was the updated total project cost that was submitted at the time of the application. So can we move to the next slide, please? So let's talk a little bit about advertisement and bidding. Bids were received on November 8th. We bid 2 contracts. We did receive 4 bids on each contract. So in a sense, we did better than we were expecting back in the fall last year, where we only had 2 bids on the force main. We got competitive bids. We would have liked to have seen a higher amount of participation, but we were able to formally open them initially. The combined low bids for those contracts was $55 million. And that is not inclusive of any alternates that we had identified and worked with the town in establishing. This did include, and these bids were, I mean, quite frankly, unexpected. Didn't expect it to be that high. I don't think anyone had an idea that it would be that high, but I'm gonna give you some reasons that I think will speak to some of that in a moment. And so following the bid and working with the town, we immediately started 2 things. One, talking with DWI, looking at what the path for potential additional funding could be. And then also working with both contractors in a negotiation basis to try to, look at what we call value engineering items, additional that could help reduce cost to the extent possible and try to lower that delta. So please move to the next slide, please. So looking at these factors here, and this is what every project and every municipality and engineers and everyone are facing. As I mentioned last fall, PVC prices tripled. We're still seeing that today. Our project bid, we had an estimate of $98 a foot for 18-inch PVC a year ago. That is exactly what the cost was of bid in this current round. So there has been no relief, no change, no reduction in the cost of that material. One of the bullets there, I think, or a couple that really stand out, is this item of AIS compliance, and AIS stands for American Iron and Steel. And what that is a requirement through the federal funding that your equipment and materials have to meet a certain minimum of American, basically produced in America, American iron and steel. The reason I think that's impactful is in construction projects, we have been seeing for projects that had approved American iron and steel delivered or proposed equipment or materials. Things that had already been submitted during construction phase had been approved, what we call shop drawings, and we were expecting to be delivered on site. We've had numerous projects where availability of those projects just were not available. Either the timeline extended them out so far where something had to be done, or just availability and delivery became very impactful. And we've seen that across the board. And that's what's happening out in the market. The next item there is, I think this is probably one of the single most factors that related is that volatility in terms of those deliveries. It adds a lot of uncertainty to the project. It's something that we as engineers, we can't, how do we account for that? How do we know what a bidder is seeing? Those are things that are in his purview, not necessarily things that fall under our purview. But it leads them to adding costs to mitigate risk. And I think that's important because, and Kent will attest, when we had the pre-bid conference for this project, contractors asked, specifically related to that bullet, could we put a provision into the contract that would alleviate a penalty on them if materials or equipment was impacted by delivery? And we prepared a statement that basically said that the town would endeavor to work with the contractor, assuming that sufficient and reasonable documentation was provided that would show an impact or delay. With the whole point is not holding them in peril, which impacts your project, impacts your cost, and allows them to bid more effectively. So we did that prior to the bidding. And that was unique. We haven't added any language like that in any contract, but again, we tried to do that here. Labor costs have increased, but not to the sense the materials have. This next item, I think, is something that I think is again very significant. Limited subcontractor participation, and I've got two examples, one from each contract. The onset of funding that we've got right now, and the market is flooded with work. The luxury that we had with this project is it was a shovel-ready project, and we're sort of already out in the front of a lot of the funded projects that have just been funded from the spring, and those that will be funded here first of the year. So we're trying to get out in advance in the market of a project that's already available, because you're competing in an area, in an arena that already is flooded with work. And it's only going to get worse for the next 4 to 5 years, because following up on this influx of money, you're going to have the federal money that's coming out that they're still trying to determine how it's going to be allocated, but it's not going to get any better. So we've seen the market conditions really impact us. And let me give you an example. Contract one, which was the pump station work at the wastewater plant. The day before the bid, we opened bids on November 8th. We were contacted on Monday, and this happened to be the low bid contractor. Didn't know it at the time, but he called and said he had reached out to 20 electrical subcontractors and could not get a single bid from any one of them. Could we give any advice of who to find, where to reference, who to contact? We provided information that we had from the fall bid that was available. Those contractors were not bidding, but we gave them as much information, and we were concerned, are we going to get sufficient bids on bid day due to subcontractor participation? Have not heard of a situation similar to that. Over 20 electrical subcontractors, he received one bid, and all of the other 3 bidders used that same bidder. So I think that shows that the market, they're just busy, and that has an impact, and it's hard to determine how much that impacts. This one in contract 2, I think, has honestly, it's unbelievable, but it has a much greater impact on our project. And what I'm related to, again, the low bidder, as we were working on negotiation items, brought to our attention that, and again, I mentioned We did not open bids in fall of 21. But the low bidder, who's currently the low bidder, what prepared a bid at that time. We didn't have those numbers. He didn't provide anything to us, but as we drill down into trying to find out where the project costs were elevated, he even said it at the day of the bid, and Kent was there, that our project got really out of hand because of the directional drill installations that were required for our project. And he said they more than tripled from the pricing that he had received previously on that work. So we dug into that a little bit, and that increase, that delta between fall of 21 and what we received fall of 22 was $8.1 million just for installation of the directional drill, not materials, not anything else. And a lot of that was driven by availability of subcontractors, because he only had one subcontractor that met the entire scope of the project. And even though he had other pricing, he couldn't, take the risk of entering a price that may have been lower without having the full scope of work. What's interesting is that particular sub bid that he received as the low this year was the second low last year. And his pricing was around, the same as it was. So no change in scope, no change in alignment, no anything that impacted $8.1 million in installation cost alone. And a lot of that was the low bidder, who was probably the most reputable low bidder providing a bid, did not submit a bid because he was too busy and had too much work and wouldn't entertain, even after the bid, opportunities to provide a quote. So that's significant. How do you plan? How do you expect? How do you know that you're going to get subcontractor issues like that? To me, that's very significant, just in the price alone. So these things did happen. The last item up, I want to just point, and again, this is just for reference and context. We reached out to DWI and we said, please tell us over the last 3 to 4 months, maybe 5 months, other projects that you have funded that have bid in that same period. Can you give us an idea of what the climate's like? So in the same bid period as ours that we've fallen into, 13 projects bid that are funded by DWI. 11 of the 13 are over budget. Some by a little bit, some by an excessive amount like ours. Again, what it points to, market volatility that every owner, engineer, developer, everybody is dealing with. It's hard to assess, but it is across the board, and unfortunately it's the result of our market. Next slide, please. So what have we been doing? We haven't been sitting idle. We've worked very hard and continue to work through negotiations with the low bid contractors. Unfortunately, and as I provided to you in June, we had already included a lot of value engineering items that we had worked through the town and staff back in June as we were preparing for this next bid. We had a lot of that already incorporated. So expecting to go in and get a lot of reduction for cost impacts. We felt it was going to be a stretch, but we've worked on these. One of the things I want to tell you is these are items suggested by the contractor, not that we are necessarily recommended, because a lot of these items will change the design of your project and it will impact the conservativeness of a project like this. Again, we're transmitting wastewater 14 miles. That is a very unique application. So determinations would have to be made by the town if they decided to accept some of these that may be against some of their own standards, or may not against the standard. Let me back up. But something that may require some alleviation of the standard to get a same size or similar product, but at a cost savings. All right. And so what that totaled up to be, where we looking at pipe pressure class change, material for directional drills, thrust restraint. If you totaled all that up and made changes, you're looking at 3.2 million that could be saved. Just as what's been provided by the contractor. One of the things I want to caveat within that 3.2 million would be a significant change at the railroad where we cross as we're in Lee County. We had to do special design and determination to get the approval for permits from the railroad. We basically directional drilled under and had to put a sleeve of directional drill material in excess of what we normally have done. That's not usually customary, but it was required to get the permit. That cost alone, that particular drill, I think, was over $3 million. And so the contractor has expressed, if we change materials, if we change some of the, aspects of that, we could get, about $600,000 in net savings. So all of these things total up to about 3.2 million. But again, there has to be some consideration by the town are they worth accepting, because it compromises some of your conservativeness in the design and operation and longevity of the project. Contract one was reached out. That's the one that really, we received 240,000 as a potential deduct. And as I had mentioned to Kent along the way, it wasn't expected that there was going to be a lot of savings there, because we had already value engineered it to the point it could be. But again, there's a little bit of savings there. So you're looking at combined about 3.5 just in material or changes that could be evaluated. If you couple that with a way to get that delta in installation costs from the subcontract, it would get you a whole lot closer to maybe cutting this delta in half to something that's more manageable for us to pursue, reasonable funding that could be acquired and try to get this project going. So I got an item up there about the rebid to mitigate cost. That's only put up there is we talked with Mr. Misc about this. If there's any of these negotiation items that has to be open to all bidders, so that it would be fair, then we may have to go back out for rebid. When you have a contract in hand or a bid in hand and you're trying to negotiate, that's your best leverage. But when you give that up, you have no guarantee that you're going to get a bid as competitive or anywhere in the ballgame, because again, as I told you, the market is extremely fluid. In terms of supplemental funding, there's several options. I mean, there's options out there, but it's going to impact some time. As I mentioned earlier, we applied for the ARPA grant. Well, the ARPA grant funds are going to be fully expended through awards that DWI is going to be implementing here at the first of the year. They do not know what grant monies are going to look like, if they're even available, through this influx of funding that's coming through the next wave from the federal government. It likely will not be to the same level, and probably will have different focus of areas of where that money's going, but that's still open. The DWI is not fully clear of how that's going to be worked out. A couple things that's been thought about is, if we're successful in getting the funding, the grant funding that we applied for, that would put us right about the amount of money, maybe if we made a few deducts, to go ahead and award the force main contract and go ahead and get construction started. And we could get construction started on that 14 miles of main and get that moving while we look to pursue other funding. And right now, DWI has indicated that they're not going to entertain a request for additional loan. It's going to have to be a form of going back through their normal funding process, which would be the May 2023 round, and then subsequently the fall 2023 round. So we've already maximized the amount of loan increase that we can get without having to go back before them. But if we were able to award and get part of the work underway, it would give us time to pursue that additional funding and trying to make the project whole. And again, that's contingent on ARPA award. The other thing that's out there, and we've seen a lot of this in the last couple of years, is legislative appropriations. I don't know if you've tracked or seen, but over the last 2 years, the legislature has appropriated quite a bit of money for projects. And I think a project like this fully qualifies based on its need and its impact and its value to the area. But that's something that needs to be pursued. I think that there are still monies out there that are appropriated that could be pursued. And I think that may be an avenue that needs to be pursued with fervor. as I mentioned, this phased approach, I do want to just leave this thought with you that I do think it has merit. Again, if the monies allow us to at least get one of those contracts started. And the reason being is I think you have a little bit of time, and I know it doesn't seem like it, but you have a little bit of time related to how much wastewater is being generated and treated in the area. I've looked over the last 6 or actually 3 months since August when the Chatham Park plant came online, and we've been tracking the flow at the Pittsburgh's plant. And you know, it's a commingled effluent now that goes out of that plant. So we've been looking at the total. And right now, as of this, this was last month's, 350,000 gallons a day. And remember, the force main project going down to Sanford is 2 million gallons a day based on interbasin transfer requirements. So you're right around 350,000 gallons a day that's being collected in the area and treated. Although growth is occurring and it's going to keep occurring, that may lend you a little bit of time to pursue a phased option and to pursue other funding that best positions you to get the full project in place. So I just wanted to point that out so that you have an aspect of what is or is not available. This last item is, you know, Kent and I, we've talked about this, and I haven't shared this with him, but we talked about outside of the box approaches and how can we do something that could, you know, just something to think about. And that's why I throw up this last point related to the possible merger with Sanford. And I'll be honest with you, I know that there's discussions going on, but I don't know the ins and outs or have the parameters of what's happening there. But I will say this is when this project was put together and the interlocal agreement with Sanford was prepared, the town had I think it was a 25-year period of payback of debt service, paying down debt service towards facilities, basically Sanford's wastewater plant, a portion of their facility. Chatham Park agreed to pick up 25% of that cost. So the town had 75% of what was projected with principal and interest being $10.5 million over 25 years. My point is this, if a potential merger is in place or happens, does that put you in a position that now you're working with a partner where some of that debt service could be applied towards the transmission project as opposed to being applied to the treatment facility? Again, outside the box, but you're already committed and that could help you offset debt service increase if that was something that was on the table and thinking about. Again, trying to think outside the box. The other thing, and again, this is a stretch, but I think it's worth mentioning. Should the merger go through, we're sending water across the interbasin transfer wastewater south. I know that there are projects looking to send water north, and there's going to be ultimately at some point a balance. But there's a benefit for our water going south and their water coming north to offset what the interbasin transfer presents itself right now as a barrier. Just want to think about, I mean, if a merger occurs, is there any cost sharing or cost provisions that could be applied toward this significant project that's win-win for both parties? So again, I'm not pointing those out. I point those out as something that's outside the box, a consideration. But when we're trying to make up the delta and trying to move this important project ahead, I think points like that should be thought about and just explore what the options are. I don't know if it has any legs to it, but I think that it's important because that now becomes a regional aspect and project partners that you're now working with long-term. So last slide, please. And this is just my closing slide, but what I wanted to do here, Kent mentioned, I think I've addressed some of the questions that were sent to us today and some of the previous information, but additional questions that we received that I wanted to go ahead and address was a question was raised about the intent of this project related to capacity. I can tell you that the capacity of this project from its inception was always to provide 2 MGD of wastewater transmission to Sanford. Now, the 2 MGD is related to what the interbasin transfer limits us to. But that interbasin transfer also allows us to pump at a peak rate. So we're not talking about 2 MGD that's transferred. The system is designed for a peak rate of 3 MGD. So that's what's been designed. That's what's been permitted. And that's what's been in place for their inception. So it's not a 2 MGD, even though it's transmission average of 2 MGD, it can transmit up to 3 MGD. It was never designed or planned for or considered as a 5 MGD option right out of the gate. Now, we knew that this was phase one of multiple phases that were going to happen over time to support wastewater needs. But, and we know that this system has the ability to expand based on its configuration. And what I mean by that is the 18-inch line is appropriate for what we are trying to accomplish. Because of the length of line, the size of it, the velocity that we're trying to do at that 3 MGD is going to prevent you from having, and again, I'm getting too technical and I apologize, but it's going to prevent you from having pressure wave issues that can be detrimental to the force main. We don't want to have problems with transmission of wastewater 14, 15 miles. So we put together a process that would work. And in doing so, the other part of this process is, and again, I'm getting technical, but please permit me. We design force mains, typically the ideal, the high point is at the end of the line. So when you're pumped from A to B, you're always pumping uphill. Our project, again, like everything else that's been with this project, is unique. Our high point is closer to Pittsburgh than what it is to Sanford. What does that mean? That means that we have a pressure zone of force main and we have a transition gravity zone. Also, what that means, because of the grade or elevation difference from that high point to where we tie in to Sanford system, that delta of elevation creates a higher flow rate in that segment than what we're able to pump by what I just told you, the restrictiveness from the IBT. So what does all that mean? That means that if we've got 3 MGD currently planned, the system will allow up to about 4 MGD with no change in it. But once it starts getting over 4 MGD, that's going to significantly change the operating conditions of the system. What that means is the system becomes fully pressurized, probably changes the configuration of pumps, may require an intermediate pump station, but that's all about at some point in the future when that flow gets to a point where it has to be increased. So I just wanted to point out, and the question was asked, was it ever planned for 5 MGD? No, it was planned for 3 MGD with the ability, and this was mentioned to staff and Mr. Kennedy multiple times. It has the ability to take us right up to 4 MGD without really any changes. Anything over that, it does something that has to be evaluated. So just wanted to make sure that that was clear on that. And
Charlie, could I ask you to pause there real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
So those pressures on the downhill side, do they present engineering issues, or is there a need for pressure reduction on a sewer force main?
No, sir. What we do is, what's critical there is you have to manage the air in the system. And we do that by what we call combination air release valves. And so as they are strategically placed throughout the alignment, the pressure zone always stays fluidized. As soon as the pump's cut off from the peak of that location down, it starts free flowing. So you have to have basically the valve to allow air in, so it doesn't create a vacuum to prevent a pressure problem, but it will continue to flow until it's, the next cycle comes on. So it's a combination of what's been engineered to allow that system to work. This system is almost identical with the exception of length that we did in town of Clayton, pumping from Clayton to Raleigh. That system was about 7 miles. So about half of this, maybe 6 miles, about half the distance, the exact same scenario. And that project has been running perfect. And that's the same application here. So we have all that engineered in, if that's answering your question, to manage pressures, variations, and allow for it to operate as we expect it's going to operate due to its unique conditions. Does that answer?
Yeah, thank you.
I think another thing that was asked, or question was asked, our engineering services does include construction, admin, and observation. I think the question was, is that a percentage of construction-based fee? And the answer is no. Not a single component of our fee that we have applied, whether it's been design, permitting, CA, CO, or any of our other supplemental services, are not construction, percentage of construction based. So Those fees they were established actually back in 2018 with this project, and they haven't been changed, amended a couple of times in certain areas, but they're not subject to the percentage of the construction costs. So that was a question that was asked. The last thing that I wanted to point out, so I showed you that what we applied for in September was a $37 million project. At the project inception, back in 2017, but expecting a bid for this project in 2019. Our project was estimated at 19.7 million. And I believe that was a fair and reasonable estimate. Back in mid-year of last year, we maximized our loan and increased from 19.7 to 21.5, thinking that would help offset some of the things. That was put in place before any of the market happened, especially, again, your project is large diameter PVC pipe that was significantly impacted at the time we were bidding. So now the last estimate was up around 37. So I've given you some factors that, and I know it's hard to fathom, but the market volatility is a hard thing to put your finger on. And I think I've given you examples of, what our contractors are facing, trying to put together not only material delivery, material availability. I don't know how we can estimate the cost of that when they are putting together and responsible for their means and methods of how to do that. And then we definitely, we know the market's busy, but we do everything we can to make sure that it's as open competition as possible. So you get the benefit of the bidding to have the more folks participating. So try to adjust. I think I've tried to address what the progression of the cost has been, what some of the factors are. There may have been a couple other questions, but that pretty much concludes what I wanted to present. I wanted to give you a little bit of look back. I wanted to tell you where we've been recently and kind of look forward of where we're headed, consuming that the town is on board with moving in some of those certain directions. Are there any other questions that have been brought up or posed or you've thought of with what I presented tonight?
Yes.
Yes.
I think one of the factors that you didn't mention too of the reroute is that it shortened the overall length of the line. So how much did that shorten it?
It shortened it by about 1 mile.
Okay.
A little over about 5,300 feet.
Okay. So whatever it costs.
I'm sorry, let me back up. The amount that we reduced from the point of connection to Sanford's plant was about a mile in length.
Mm-hmm.
You have to offset the distance going now to the west, I guess it's to the east over to Little Buffalo. But we saved a little less than a mile of pipe length in going that direction.
Okay. So that would have been a cost savings.
It was a cost savings
from there. Yeah. So I understand material volatility and all of those things. Like it sounds like PVC has been steady since the summer, even though it's at an elevated rate.
It is.
So, it's just a, $25-30 million change in cost since June is difficult that it wasn't anticipated to give us more time to find this money that we need.
When we spoke in June, we didn't anticipate. I think I was questioned about what the cost was. I think you asked me, and I told you I thought it was north of 30.
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, north of 30 did not mean 55. North of 30 was best available information and what we pursued in trying to pull together numbers. I can tell you again, a lot of those factors, add up with increasing that cost. I don't believe it's a $55 million project, but that's what we got. And I think a lot of factors go into that. But when we presented in June, no, that was not the expectation. And I don't think anybody would have reasonably prepared an opinion that would have put it at that range.
Mm-hmm.
So
agreed. In some of the grants we talk about, and we talked about other things for, that are an advantage of being a distressed utility, but that money is to become undistressed. It's not to build a force main necessarily. So as we talk about all this money that's, potentially available in grants and or grants for mergers and these things that might help offset this cost, it's meant to be used for all types of expenses related to becoming undistressed, and not just this. So we become eligible for it because we're distressed, but we still have a lot of other things to take care of too. This is the immediate need, certainly. But just we've got to keep that in mind as we talk about this money that's available, that we don't use it all for one thing without understanding future costs related to non-distress and the merger. That was that. And then the 5 million gallon number, like that's pretty key to us in all this planning, and particularly with this, with the cost really tripling since this project was imagined. So a $55 million, 2 million gallon force main is of no value to the town of Pittsboro. Particularly with the arrangements that we have in place now. So this needs to be a 5 million gallon force main, which becomes a better deal, obviously with future costs, but it needs to be that we need to constantly have that number in mind for this thing. Obviously future upgrades required, but some of the VE options about changing the pressure class and changing some of the fitment things, like we cannot make those choices that make this less capable of transmitting more.
That's correct.
As we go through. So, and I know you said those were suggestions that weren't necessarily
Right. No,
taking, but
you're exactly right. I
Okay.
mean, there is an aspect of expandability. I can tell you, and another thing you alluded to, the cost benefit ratio of this project was something that the former manager and I talked about a lot, based on the benefit of what Pittsboro was getting in terms of capacity out of that 2 MGD. And again, that was only limited based on the interbasin transfer that's available. It doesn't mean that it was always set at that, but as you are able to transmit, if water comes up north and we're able to offset that a little bit, you can put more water in that line. It has the capability of doing that, but that was not its original design. This 5 million gallon number, I'll be honest with you, first time I've heard it. We've been asked about what the system can do. And based off of our engineering report and what it was planned to do as part of that first phase and all the requirements, it's designed for that. But it was also said, hey, you can have expandability to a point, and then beyond that, you still can have expandability. So as you said, I mean, it has growth potential. All of those elements that we talked about for the conservativeness I mentioned speak to why we designed it the way it was, because we expected it was not going to be just 2 million gallons a day. It was over time would be increased and would have to be expanded. So, I mean, it's the whole point. I mean, it's a critical connection between, 2 municipalities that now will be in place forevermore. So,
yeah. And in the 4 million. So let me first go back and correct a little bit, slightly what I said about not being of value to Pittsboro. So, Chatham Park is obviously clearly a part of Pittsboro. And there's value to that, but just generally from the cost of things,
that's correct.
It doesn't add capacity for outside the PDD, and just the cost of things like that's not a good deal for that amount of treatment.
That's correct.
Point.
That is exactly right.
But the 4 million number that you mentioned is good news in that we could delay future upgrades. We could take advantage of the IBT with the other projects, and understand you guys aren't involved in those, but that can help us stretch out the timeline for
That's
future
significant.
improvements,
Yes, absolutely.
and have more treatment capacity,
Yes,
potential. So that's good news. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously a $30 million surprised all of us. But it's I mean, it tripled from the original.
Well, again, this won't help the situation, but it goes to the point again that we're talking about. Your facility is your wastewater plant is a 0.75 MGD plant. Another DWI project that was just recently bid, 0.75 MGD, $47 million. And the original monies that were planned for that was about 18 million. I mean, we've been brought into that project. It's not one that we were involved with, but we've been asked. But it goes to show you that there is significant volatility. I mean, is it reasonable that a plant like that could have been built at 18 million? Maybe, but for it to be 47 million, it was not projected. So, I mean, again, economies of scale, I know are a little different here. But the fact of the matter is the volatility is real. It's an impact. It's a new normal that we're dealing with, and we do our best to project it. Again, I know the delta is large. We weren't expecting it to be that large. I mean, I can't sit here and tell you that we weren't just as surprised as you were.
And I think, I mean, you brought up a good point too about sort of increase. There's no end to volatility in the future because of additional federal funding. So we have, if we keep this project moving, maybe we can stay ahead of more future volatility. And just unavailability of projects, right?
As much as it probably hurts to say this, the bids you have in hand are probably better than where you're going to be moving down the road. I mean, probably got as good a price. If we can make some offsets. I mean, the biggest one I would love to see is if we could have that installation cost related to the force main. I don't know of a mechanism to make that happen, but that delta is significant. And, you know, is there any way to offset that? Even if we don't make any other changes, could we cut $5, $6, $7 million based on a subcontract change or a little difference there? All of it adds up and all of it helps. But again, like you just said, moving forward, re-advertising, rebidding somewhere in the future, we expected to get some relief within a year. We did. What's going to happen in 5, 6 months, or I'm telling you, and then you're going to get into an issue of having reputable contractors who are going to be bidding your work versus those who can, I mean, it's coming, And I don't mean, but that's the fact. It's good that we've got an influx of funding and projects. The downside is it's going to flood the market and prices are going to be uncontrollable. So I think that's a fact.
And then you mentioned the alternative or potential alternative of like letting the contract go on or whatever. Starting on the construction
on one,
of the
awarding one and working on the
and
other.
then working on additional funding for the others. But the grants and the loans that we've been awarded so far are obviously for a complete transmission system. So is that acceptable for those funding sources for DWI for us to say we're going to use all of the money you gave us plus some other magic money we get from somewhere else to build partial project? They
being DWI have given us a verbal discussion that breaking it up into phases is something they would be worthy. They would talk about it. Is it fully accepted yet? But it's an option. And and Ken, I believe, was copied on it. We just received that information actually yesterday on Sunday from DWI. The question was asked, and they are open to working with an awarding project, assuming that the funds to capture that full construction can be in place, and then working to phase the other with some other sorts of agreement or what the plan is of moving forward to acquire what would be needed to make the project fully complete.
Okay.
So
just to state the obvious, the pipe is useless without the other.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, you can't have one without the other.
Right.
But it's something that I think has merit. I mean, I know it's different, but if it helps you move and get things started, I think it's important. So it's an option, but it is something that's open for discussion from the state. Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Yes.
Charlie, one thing, that was pretty good news for me about the 4 million gallons. But what would that consist of on our to go to the 4 million gallons? What would we have to upfit or anything on that?
The primary thing that would have to upfit there would be an increase in pump capacity, what we call the transfer pumps. The capacity of them would have to be increased. That would really be the only change. Let me back up. Electrical service for that probably would require higher horsepower, but it could be done with, that would really be the only change.
That's to go above 4 million?
That's to take it probably up to the 4 million.
To go up to.
Okay, I thought you said.
The only change is probably is dealing with pumps.
Okay, I thought you said no changes for 4
No,
million.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
No changes in the configuration of the alignment, but the pumps are basically, they're at their capacity of 3. We could probably make adjustments to them to increase that capacity.
So those
that's minor.
Installed up to 3.
That's correct.
Okay.
And they could be modified.
Increase to go forward.
Modified later. Yes, sir.
Okay.
So. Yes.
I would just say on that, like, I'm not interested in increasing price more, but if there's a way that we can install increased electrical service now and not throw away hopefully 4-year-old motor.
Have the space for it, or
yeah, we can do that.
Further questions for Charlie?
Yeah. Charlie, real quick, what was the diameter
18.
Force main is 18 inch.
2 inches. And on that, the downhill side, what do you anticipate the PSI to be?
Say that again.
The PSI,
Well, it actually is going to operate by gravity. And
right?
so it's driven, basically, you think of it as, I think it's right at 250 feet of driving head from elevation change. So it's going to be gravity driven. I can check the pressures and let you know.
I'd
But
like to know.
it will not be taxing the
No,
limits of the
it's-
pump.
It's point of curiosity.
No, absolutely. I can provide that to you.
Thank you.
Just for point of context, the pressure side, the pipe we specified was 235 PSI. The pressure zone component right now out of the gate would be pumping at right at 100 PSI. So it's about half of what your pipe is rated at, and that's pretty much standard practice that we don't try to go above because of all those flexibility and considering the length here. So we do have a little bit of velocity and increase we can make with the 18. But we're in a very good spot with the size of the line that we've got. That just gives you an idea. It's 100 pounds roughly on the pressure side and it was much less on the gravity side. And I can give you that.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Any additional questions? This was informational only and,
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
thank you. We have, our final item here of, sustainable development practices and incentives memorandum. Steve, we're looking forward to having this information. Thank you.
Right on, appreciate it. Give me. Sorry. Don't know. Forgive me, once it's connected, when is it supposed to? Share the screen? No, is that?
Might try, we're under, I think it's monitor extensions or something like that.
Steve, can you talk us through it?
Yeah. I think you-
How about I'm just gonna log in and share the screen.
Yeah, I think that's
Sound
what you
good?
have to do.
Forgive
Yes.
us or forgive me about. Yeah, I know Katie did it so quickly. She just left.
No, so I think Colby was presenting hers for her.
Oh, right, but the one before that, okay,
Yeah.
makes me feel a little better. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, she gave up on her update too. so.
Okay. All right, do you? I think it'll still work. Okay.
We got.
All right.
Oh, there we go.
I think we're good, right? Correct? Yes. Oh, there's my,
That's your cat.
that's one of my cats.
All right.
Yes. Okay, hello again. My name is Steve Shalau. I'm a planner with the town. Over there, who will be speaking later is Jamie Hager, and she is a net zero and green building specialist with Southern Energy Management. She'll be able to further elaborate on that in a little bit. But I am going to run through the agenda for this presentation on sustainable development practices and incentives for Pittsburgh. So Okay, we're going to kick things off with the overview. We'll briefly touch upon what brought us to the creation of this information session. And then Jamie will delve into some details on Southern Energy Management and the work it has accomplished. And then we're going to highlight some examples of available incentives that are currently being utilized in Pittsboro right now. And then we'll move forward to discussing practical yet impactful options for sustainable development practices, and then how to pair the practices with incentives that already exist within the UDO under the affordable housing. After that, we will briefly talk about our next steps and of the trajectory of this work. There's more work to be done. And then we'll end on discussion or feedback. So for a little background on what this presentation stems from and why we're here. In the past, the town's UDO offered green building incentives, but in 2018, the section was removed from the UDO. It contained really good ideas, but the language was somewhat complicated and to manage and then to implement effectively. And then earlier this year, yes, still this year, yeah, interest in reintroducing the incentives back into the UDO was voiced. And that's what led to this partnership between Jamie and I. And as for me and my experience and why I'm tethered to this, I come from a social psychology background, but I have a master's in urban planning with a concentration on energy equity and environmental justice communities. And during my time at grad school in Boston University and then working at Duke University's Nicholas Institute for Energy, Environment, and Sustainability, I was introduced to the intersection of sustainability and planning. And that's what led me to work on projects that revolved around household energy burdens, solar insecurity, and urban heat island mitigation. And with that, this presentation is just meant to be an update on the work that we've done and what can occur after. And so I'm gonna.
Steve, I just wanted to clarify that one point too. That was, I think the green development incentives were in a draft of the UDO, but never made it to the.
Never made it.
Adopted version of the UDO.
That entire thing still remains quite cryptic to
Yes,
me. So,
understand.
okay. So I appreciate that. So it was never in there. We never got it in there.
Correct.
But the conservation
There were a
overlay.
few topics that we removed before adoption to revisit exactly like this, to put more work in before we put it in the UDO.
Hence this. Was the conservation overlay district in, or was that? Was that
removed before
Similar.
passage?
Yeah,
okay,
same.
All right.
Situation. Yeah.
Okay. Ready. Good. Yeah, I know. Okay. We're learning as well.
Pull this down a little bit. Well, thank you guys, and thanks for lasting for your final information session of the evening. I'm really pleased to be here, and thank you for taking the time. I'm a Chatham County resident and have been since 2006. And I have been with Southern Energy Management since 2007. So a little close to 16 years going on. And we've just celebrated we're in our 21st year of business. Southern Energy, if you don't know, just to give you a little background, we are a building science and renewable energy firm founded here in North Carolina. A husband and wife team that's grown from a team of about 30 people to now we're up to probably about 120, which has been really great. We've had a lot of growth in the last several years, interestingly enough. And excited to get to talk to you guys a little bit about what I get to talk about every day, which is my role at Southern Energy. I started out as a home energy rater, doing inspections and field ratings for residential homes. And now I do consulting and plan development and standards development for communities, developers, while still working hand in hand with builders to help them build houses that can meet energy efficient and green criteria. And so when it came up the opportunity to work with Pittsboro in my home area to help really clarify incentives and really help drive the type of housing, not just reward the type of housing that we do generate here, but also drive it in a direction that you'd like to see it, healthier, energy efficient, that kind of thing. I was really excited to be able to do that for you. So The next step is I wanted to at least let you know it's available. A lot of folks don't know that there are incentives available for energy efficient construction right now in Pittsboro, and we have communities that are taking advantage of that. So when we talk about developing incentives for Pittsboro, I just want to, this work that I'm getting to do with Steve and the staff, and I wanted to say that they are very motivated, and I find it very exciting. This wouldn't be happening without their motivation. So is that we're building on that. You, from an incentive standpoint, you can be excited that there's actually money out there for builders right now to do better housing. So for these three examples, particularly in this area, Duke Energy does have a direct incentive program for builders of residential and multifamily construction that ranges from $750 to $9,000 a house, depending on how energy efficient you get it. And just passed recently with legislation for the next 10 years, there will be tax credits available directly to building companies for achieving energy efficiency certifications. These two, Energy Star and the Department of Energy, has a program called the Zero Energy Ready Home. So significant money is available to them now for taking these steps. So what does it take to move the needle for Pittsboro, knowing that there's already incentives that exist? Just as Steve said, one of the things we noticed from the previous language that was being drafted for the UDO was that while there were some really great ideas, it was complicated and they didn't all connect. And they maybe weren't even going to be as impactful. And even though I really loved seeing some of them, I wasn't really even sure that people would take advantage of them. So when you're creating an incentive, it's a little different than creating a ordinance, right? You know, you're not requiring them to do anything. You're hoping to incentivize them towards something. And so the target needs to be within reach, but reach, right? You want them to reach, but you want them to get it. So we simplify. The first step we did was try to simplify that process, both for builders, developers, for the understanding, for the board, so that it makes sense when things come through, but also for staff, because we don't want to create a bunch of burden on the implementation and management side and paperwork or more administrative processes, just to understand something. So that was one of the objectives, was to keep the practices simple but impactful, to improve on incentives already available. And then finally, just to raise awareness. We felt like if we're creating incentives for Pittsboro in the building industry and in the building realm, one of the biggest benefits is just that you're now getting to ask the question. At least it's written down somewhere and you get to say something like, well, you know, at what level are you going to implement these things? You know, and then without having an incentive structure, having incentives in your unified development ordinance, it might be difficult to even approach those questions because they're technical. They get pretty technical. And I've been in this industry for 16 years, right? And I built houses for several years before that. And so I worked really hard to get the technical side down, but I see all day long, like you will lose people quickly. So understanding the benefits of what's happening, being able to ask those questions and then see what's going on. So I've got 4 more slides. The 3 main categories. This one's energy. Is my suggestion for energy was to keep it simple and have one item. This item has a lot. There's 4 bullet points, but that's just because we're trying to cover multifamily construction, single family residential, something as well as regulations that removing barriers. There's some other programs that are available. I know the Soul Smart that kind of came across the office, removing barriers to things like renewable energy, and then actually creating a stretch goal. So that's what this is. And as far as an information session and then, you know, being honorable of time, we wanted to present these to you, see if you had questions about them. I don't want to get that. I'm happy to get into the technical pieces of it, but you'll be getting this again. So this is the first pass at a creation of incentives. And from the energy front, this is where we're at. Basically, what this intention is that a development, a community, in order to qualify for an incentive, a sustainable development incentive, would commit under the energy section to all of these things. And what we're asking is that all of the houses are certified, and well, all of the buildings, multifamily, single family, and any commercial buildings achieve some level of certification. Pittsboro, I know a while back talked a lot about LEED. And that's a great program. It can also be really expensive. And so the language intentionally is not naming a program because there are a lot of them out there, but and that provides the building industry the flexibility to be able to find the right program, still deliver an impactful building, hit the right things, but not get too tied up in the costs of certification. The next two are within relationship to renewable energy. It would be to that single family development homes are what we call solar ready, which just is adding a pre-wire or conduit space for the future installation of both photovoltaics and electric vehicles. So not requiring that they do it as far as installations, but requiring that they be ready, which can go a long way. And it's a low cost way to really deliver a lot more information of an impact. And then that your architectural and guidelines do not restrict rooftop solar on any orientations so that you can maximize the opportunities for buildings buyers, and that commercial multifamily buildings complete a solar feasibility study. And we do a lot of work with multifamily and commercial buildings in my company. And so that's where this comes from, is that a feasibility study, when you request it, at least requires the project team at an early stage to assess whether or not solar is available. And then asking them to stretch and from a commercial standpoint, look to install some as well.
Jamie? Quick
Yes.
question on the second bullet there. You mentioned either pre-wired or conduit. And that feels like from my EV experience, that feels like a big difference, because when I'm reviewing policies, municipal policies, for example, the city of Atlanta has a policy for EV ready that requires conduit in the ground and space in the panel box, but does not require the wire. And I'm wondering, does the net zero, is that net zero as in the DOE's net zero?
The program from the
Yeah,
previous.
or is this our name, net zero ready?
Correct. This is just a name. This is not in reference. This is not a program for a community.
Okay.
Correct. And we can change that, but that's a good point. Don't want that to be confusing.
Okay, so these are of our own making.
Correct.
And so, yeah, I guess just to clarify again, that second bullet, would that refer to and require actual metal in the conduit or just the conduit?
So that's some great questions. Those are some great details to that we would want to, in the actual draft of incentives, to elaborate. I kind of pared these down to fit them on a slide, but under the technicalities of it, we'd want to make sure it was super clear.
Yeah.
And evaluate which was which. I think I've seen it both ways. We do it both ways as a company. So usually when we do it, it includes the wire. So great question. Underwater. So this is where we wanted to provide both flexibility versus all or nothing. And the intention here, and up there's a little asterisk if you can see it, where it says minimum 1 from A and 2 from B. This is a little bit left over from previous language where there were a lot of items, and then there were a Schedule A and a Schedule B, intending to have items that were tougher, I think, and then items that might have been more easy to implement. And so this is the first pass at this, and it's still to be developed how many would be required, but the A's are still considered the tougher ones, and the B's would be easier to implement or potentially less costly. So giving some flexibility, knowing that every community, every builder, every of commercial or a residential status may not even be applicable to them. We wanted to have enough that people could take advantage of, but not so much that you're dealing with a whole lot of items. So the first several items, the first 2 deal with stormwater management, and as well as the first 3 actually deal with stormwater management. And I believe staff has looked at these. We'll review them again, but they are specific to some of the Pittsburgh needs, which was really interesting to me, which I thought was cool. Particularly the wetlands. Pittsburgh doesn't have a requirement on wetlands at this time for residential. So we're one of the few towns that do not. So that was why this incentive is included in there. And then landscaping, native plants, naturalized for water preservation, including the turf. This is not uncommon and usually is not a barrier to participation. When I get to have these conversations, it's mostly an education session and then working with the landscape team. We're lucky in North Carolina that a lot of our native species, we have a lot of variety for natives and naturalized species that are water efficient. And then Two other ones, access to free filtered outdoor public drinking water provided in public spaces. This also helps reduce plastic bottles. And I thought there's a development down in Charleston that I get to work with that had implemented this feature in their community, and it was well received and notably helped with plastic bottle issues. So we decided that was a smart one, particularly with water being accessible to everyone here in the community. And then water sense certified faucets and toilets for all bathroom and laboratory fixtures. I understand in light of, hopefully this still works with a 14-mile pipeline to Sanford, which may be something we want to consider. But basically all this is saying is that a water sense certified fixture, it's like an Energy Star appliance. It's an EPA program that looks at a fixture and says, can this fixture still do its job with less water? Not is it just using less water, but can it still work? So that's why it says water sense certified, because there are low flow fixtures, but if you have to flush your toilet 5 times for it to work, you're not saving water. So that's what that means. And then our final category that we chose was connection for a couple of reasons. There's a lot of ways to be connected, one within the community to each other, to access to resources, from a health perspective to our green spaces, and just also being able to walk places and interact as a community. So there's a lot of benefits under connection that also cross over into just resource materials, a lot of other categories. There's a lot of items here. I'll walk through them really quickly. One's just preservation of night skies, aligning with an international dark sky community certification. It's a pretty great program. And I know Pittsburgh, we're a growing town and we're growing fast, but as a resident of Chatham County, I still do enjoy our night skies, and so do many of my neighbors. And so I don't think it's unreasonable for us to look at that. And it's not that far off from our lighting ordinances that we have now. High priority natural resources are preserved on the site plan utilizing the North Carolina Natural Heritage Program. This comes from my time on them. I'm also a member of the planning board of Chatham County. And so this comes up a lot, and I've been well educated on the selection of natural space and natural areas. So utilizing the resources we have to really get at the heart of that. Providing multimodal, at least 2 multimodal transportation options. This is an accessibility thing. So it's things like bike lanes, sidewalks, trails, and public transit stops. There's a lot of flexibility in there, but getting people more ways to get places other than their vehicle. Then construction waste diverted from the landfill. Fascinatingly enough, this has gone up. You would think with the cost of materials being what they are, we see a lot of construction waste still in new construction, which is mind-boggling a little bit, but a slight shift in that can be done. It's a little bit tougher item. It depends on waste haulers and infrastructure, but we do have recycling facilities and we do sort here. So I think this is a smart one to, again, in terms of raising awareness. How are you dealing with your construction waste? At least if the incentive's out there, you get to ask the question. Heat island mitigation. This is just looking forward, especially into our future. If you haven't heard of heat island, it's what happens when the more urban you get and the less shade that you have, the warmer and issues that you have when you hear of big cities literally having 20-degree differences inside their city versus outside their city in their suburban areas, and the impact to folks on their air conditioning bills. A lot of that can get mitigated smartly with design. And then access to natural spaces within half a mile walking route of residential units, and including an enhanced transit stop with some criteria that I didn't remove just to kind of, a lot of these items are pulled directly out of already existing green certification programs, both for communities. There's quite a few of them out there. And part of my job is to analyze them and review them. And so try to pull information directly from a lot of folks that have spent a lot of work creating sustainable development processes and practices so that we're in alignment. So should a community actually want to pursue a certification outside of any incentives Pittsburgh offers, they're already lined up and set up for success. All right, so last couple of slides are just the work that's left to do. What about incentives? What are you going to incentivize? How are you going to incentivize this? So there's already a chart in the UDO for affordable housing. This is it. And these are the incentives that are there in our UDO right now. And what we're doing is we're taking a look at this chart and evaluating it, building off of it, but also wanting to be in alignment with it. We don't want to create a situation in which a sustainable development practice is competing with an affordable housing practice. We want them to build off of each other. Affordable housing is part of sustainable development. So that being said, it would look something like this. These are all the practices basically, but the amounts, the variety would be different. And then we had a brief discussion about, how do you qualify for the incentives? So one would, that we're still talking about would be in alignment with the affordable housing incentive. Why don't we go ahead and do that? So make sure there's a component to that. We don't have to rewrite it. We don't have to create another piece of documentation. It's already in the UDO. So meet a minimum standard there and then implement practices, yet to be determined how many, but from Schedule A and Schedule B of those 3 categories that we just reviewed. And I'm pretty sure that gets us to the conclusion. So the next steps will be that the planning department is going to draft a text amendment for your approval, for your review and approval, so that you will get to finalize and get some sustainable practices, incentives into the UDO. And it'll come up as a text amendment for you to be able to vote on in a future meeting. So I hope that was educational and informational. If you have questions, we definitely want feedback. I've been talking with the staff, and so what's important is that the town is asking for the things you need and encouraging the things that you want. And so if definitely feedback, suggestions, comments, and happy to answer any questions.
Either now or at another time, you can reach out to us. But yeah, the main
And you have
overarching thing is this is a continuous process that rely on collaboration with us and the departments, but also you and whomever wants to. So sorry if there's any questions.
Steve, can you talk about that mic? I think you might be done.
You don't need to hear that again. Okay. If there's any questions or feedback, suggestions right now, please feel free to ask.
Well, it's late, but we, thinking about your construction waste, the county mandates control of construction waste. And the dichotomy of us not requiring that and the county requiring it. I mean, it seems like it would be a very simple fix to require. Especially with this much construction that's going.
Yeah, it's simple, probably. I don't know how easy it is, but it's definitely an ask worth asking, and it would get in alignment with the county.
So lots of comments that I'll continue to engage with you on in the future, but the 2 main ones, I guess, are like, as you go through this and look at our UDO, please also look at what should be a standard for us. Like if construction waste is one of those things. So, I mean, incentives are one thing, like you said, but requirements in the UDO are another. So, what some things we could enhance in that way also, that, it would require some percentage or some of those criteria by ordinance. And then, some are, higher than that are incentives, but also the thing with incentives that, with affordable housing. So far that I know of, no one has taken advantage of our affordable housing incentives. It's likely due to not having sewer available. But the biggest thing I can say is, like, let's get these implemented and see what happens, because it's ultimately based on the market, what, if these are correct or not.
Right.
And so let's implement and then change as necessary, and get them in the UDO. So.
Yeah, I think that's really smart, and but also with incentives, you have the flexibility to adjust them pretty easily.
Yes.
A question on the 75% construction waste diversion. Can we also consider having something in there that's perhaps parallel or equal to that? Because that was the section where it's A and B, and we need 2 or 3 items from the B list. And it occurs to me that rather than think about diversion from the landfill, we should think about waste prevention in the first place. And in that, also serves the purpose of decreasing the cost of housing, we hope. Prefab, panels, modular, construction materials cut and marked in the mill for assembly on site. Is there a way to put that into language? Has anyone else ever done that with an incentive or a policy?
I don't know if I can speak to policy, but I can speak to that does exist in a lot of green building programs. So LEED and National Green Building Standards has it. It is difficult to document in the field. It is and challenging to. It's not necessarily challenging to implement. There's a lot of strategies that kind of go under the hood of achieving energy efficiency, like advanced framing strategies to minimize wood in the house. And they do definitely incentivize, panelized system or engineered systems that use less materials or that use materials more efficiently. So it exists in there. It doesn't my experience has been that it doesn't get taken advantage of as very often, and that there's a lot of market conditions for that. They may be more expensive. They may not be that close by. There's just been a lot of reasons, and there's definitely room in the market for folks to get better at that. But the documentation side usually is why people haven't jumped on it, I would say, like the planning.
Really intrigued by a recent announcement. I want to say the company is named Sumitomo. It's a Japanese company. Have you heard about them? They're going to open a plant in Randolph County.
Oh, they're a major investor.
Yeah. And I think they call themselves Sumitomo Forest Products, but they also have a housing division. And I know in other places, I think in the US, they actually have modular and affordable manufacturing.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I mean, we could definitely add it from an incentive standpoint. Yeah,
I get it.
We could look at it and reflect more what goes under the hood of modular and how do you define it, and then what are the plants? Are there certifications the plants need to meet, and how do they show up on site?
Yeah,
but yeah,
thank
for
you.
sure. I like it.
Okay.
Right. Is there not any further questions? Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you. I'll figure this out one day.
We are now at the point in our meeting where we are having a closed session. If the board will please take a motion to give me a motion to close pursuant to North Carolina General Statutes 143, 318.11, A3.
So
moved. Second.
Moved by Commissioner Shipp, seconded by Commissioner Bonitz. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries unanimously.
So
Madam Clerk, are we going to come back
Second.
All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there a motion to go into closed session about?
No. Adjourn.
That's right. We're gonna adjourn this one. Can somebody make a motion to adjourn?
Adjourn the public session. So moved.
Adjourn the public.
Adjourn the
session.
meeting.
Adjourn the meeting. Yeah.
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 Yes,
By,
second.
Commissioner Shipp, Commissioner Bonitz. Second by Commissioner Shipp. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Now, when we go back in there, we will.
Yep.
Y'all have a good evening.